Victor Horn had spent his entire career studying the past, but he'd never encountered something like this before. The Museum of Forgotten Souls was a place unknown to him, and when a letter arrived inviting him to investigate a collection of rare artifacts, his curiosity overshadowed his skepticism. The letter was unsigned, but it contained a mysterious invitation from an old college acquaintance, Gregory Finch, now the director of the museum. The museum was located on the edge of a small, quiet town in Maine, miles away from the nearest city, nestled between thick woods and overcast skies. The place seemed lost in time, its looming Gothic structure casting long shadows over the crumbling cobblestone streets. The air was damp, the kind of wet chill that sunk into your bones. As Victor stepped out of his car, he felt as though the museum itself had been waiting for him. Gregory Finch greeted him at the door with a stiff handshake. Finch was tall, almost unnervingly so, with sunken eyes and a nervous manner. His gaze flickered constantly, as if something unseen were constantly watching him. The moment they locked eyes, Victor felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. "I'm glad you came, Dr. Horn," Finch said, his voice low, almost whispering. "There are things here, things I can't explain." Victor followed him through the dark, winding corridors of the museum. The walls were adorned with fading portraits, eyes of long-dead subjects staring out at them, following their every move. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust, a scent that was almost suffocating. The floors creaked beneath their steps, and the faintest sounds echoed in the distance. There was something unsettling about the place. The deeper they went, the more isolated it seemed. Gregory led Victor into a small, dimly lit room where strange artifacts lined the walls in glass cases. Victor's eyes narrowed as he observed the items, twisted masks, warped sculptures, and bizarre trinkets that looked as if they had been pulled from nightmares. His trained historian's mind instantly cataloged the items, but there was something off about them. They didn't belong. They didn't fit into any known period or culture. "Do you feel it?" Finch asked quietly. Victor glanced at him, puzzled. "Feel what?" "The presence." "It's always there," Finch whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "The whispers." Victor stiffened. "Whispers?" The museum was unnervingly silent except for the occasional rustle of a shifting floorboard. "Let me show you the collection," Finch continued, leading him toward the back of the room. At the far end of the room, nestled between two large, ancient statues, was a display case that looked strangely out of place among the others. It was a large, rectangular box, seemingly made of blackened wood, with intricate carvings that twisted and curled in unnatural patterns. The carvings, when examined closely, seemed to change form before his very eyes, shifting between shapes like flames, eyes, and faces that seemed to watch him. "This," Finch said, his voice trembling slightly, "is the Box of Souls." Victor stepped closer to the display, captivated despite himself. The box was no more than a foot long, but there was an undeniable aura of malevolence surrounding it. The carvings were strange, almost alien in nature, but it was the way the box seemed to pulse ever so faintly that caught Victor's attention. He leaned in closer, his breath catching. For a moment, he thought he saw something in the reflection on the glass. A face. Pale, hollow-eyed, with an expression of silent terror. He blinked, and the face was gone, replaced by his own reflection. Was he imagining things? "The Box of Souls," Finch continued, his voice now barely audible, is rumored to hold the souls of those who have died in agony. It traps them, holds them, forever. It's been passed through generations, but each time it changes hands, the whispers grow louder. Victor swallowed hard, stepping back slightly. He could feel something tugging at the back of his mind, a strange compulsion to reach out and touch it. The whispers, were they real? Or was it just his exhaustion playing tricks on him? It's just a myth, Victor said, more to convince himself than to deny Finch's claims. People have always feared cursed objects. It's part of their history. No, Finch said, his voice firm, it's real. We've seen it. I've seen it. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the display case. People have disappeared. Vanished. Not in the usual sense. Their bodies are here, but their souls, they're in the box. Victor could hear his heartbeat thudding in his ears. It was hard to ignore the deep sense of unease creeping through his veins. The museum was too quiet, too still, and the box, it felt like it was watching him. Waiting. What happens to them? Victor asked, his voice a little shaky. They're trapped. Forever, Finch replied, his voice tinged with fear. We don't know how to release them. We've tried. But every time we open the box, the whispers become unbearable. People change. It starts small. A thought here, a flicker of movement there. And then they vanish. Like they were never here at all. Victor turned back toward the box, his mind reeling. This couldn't be real, could it? He heard stories about haunted objects before, but this was something far beyond his understanding. It was as if the box itself was alive, watching him with 1,000 unseen eyes. I don't believe you, Victor said, but the words felt hollow even to him. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but standing here now, in this museum, with the strange presence pressing on him, he couldn't dismiss Finch's claims so easily. Finch's face was pale, and his eyes had darkened with a look of warning. I don't expect you to believe me. Not yet. But you will. Eventually. Victor stepped back, his mind swimming with doubt and disbelief. Finch's words seemed to echo in his ears as the silence around them deepened. He needed to get out of the room. He had seen enough. Just as he turned to leave, a soft sound stopped him. A faint whisper. So faint, he thought it was the wind. But then it came again. Louder. Closer. Victor froze. Come closer, the whisper seemed to say, but not with words. It was a voice in his mind, growing clearer, more distinct. He could hear the faintest rustle of fabric, the slow drag of something heavy shifting. Victor turned back to the box, the air growing inexplicably colder. His fingers tingled with a strange energy, and his heart pounded in his chest. He was almost afraid to look inside. The whisper came again, now so loud that it felt like the very walls of the room were speaking to him. Come closer. He couldn't resist. His body moved of its own accord, as if the very air was pulling him toward the glass case. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface. The moment his skin made contact, the whisper stopped. Victor stepped back, startled, his breathing shallow. He turned to Finch, who was staring at him with wide, horrified eyes. You've done it, Finch whispered. You've touched it. Victor's stomach churned. A feeling of dread washed over him, sinking deeper into his bones. He didn't understand what was happening. All he knew was that he had crossed a line. And now, he wasn't sure he could go back. The museum was no longer just a building. It had become something else. Something alive. Elliot Stone leaned closer to the dusty plaque on the wall, the inscription barely visible under layers of grime. It had been 3 days since he arrived at the museum, and each hour only deepened the sense of unease that had settled into his bones. He had come to the museum to uncover forgotten histories, artifacts long lost to time, but what he was beginning to uncover wasn't just history, it was something far darker, something far older. The curator, an elderly man named Henry Wren, had given him a stern warning when he first entered the archives. "Some things are better left untouched, Mr. Stone," he had said, his voice grating like stones being dragged across concrete. "The artifacts here are not just objects. They hold memories. Souls." At first, Elliot had thought Wren was simply a paranoid relic of a dying breed of archivists, too eager to protect his treasures. But after 3 days, something had changed. The artifacts no longer felt like mere objects to him, they felt alive. Every time he touched one, he swore he could feel a pulse, a vibration deep within the core of the object. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination or something more sinister. But the longer he stayed, the more the feeling grew. It started with the statues, small, grotesque figures that seemed to watch him from every angle. He would turn his back for a second, and then the eyes would follow. It wasn't a trick of the light, he knew it. There was something in those eyes, something watching, waiting. He couldn't explain it, but the statues weren't just silent. They were observing, aware. The whispering started that night. Elliot had been alone in the archives, poring over a collection of ancient manuscripts when he heard it. At first, it was so soft he thought it was the wind seeping through the cracks in the stone walls. But the longer he listened, the more distinct the voice became, low, almost imperceptible, as though it were coming from inside his own head. He shook his head, dismissing it as exhaustion. But as the days went on, the whispers grew louder. And one evening, when he opened an old chest tucked away behind an iron gate, he swore the voice came from the chest itself. "Leave, leave now." He had slammed the chest shut, but the words remained echoing in his mind. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Elliot returned to the archives the next morning. His mind raced with questions. What were these artifacts? Why were they kept here, hidden from the public eye? And what was it about this place that made him feel like he was being hunted by something unseen? As he passed row upon row of exhibits, he began to feel the weight of the place pressing down on him. The air was thick with dust, and the flickering overhead lights cast long, unnatural shadows along the walls. Every corner of the museum seemed to hide something. Every object, no matter how small, seemed to possess a presence, a feeling that it had been waiting for something, for someone. His hand hovered over a display case containing a small, intricately carved box. The carvings were delicate, almost too delicate. As his fingers brushed the glass, a jolt of static shot up his spine, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. For a moment, he hesitated, his mind clouded with the warning from Wren. But the pull of curiosity was too great. With a deep breath, Elliot unlocked the display and gently lifted the box. The moment he touched it, a strange sensation flooded his senses, like the sharp tang of ozone mixed with the scent of old wood and decay. He couldn't shake the feeling that the box was breathing. His eyes narrowed as he turned the box in his hands, inspecting the carvings more closely. They weren't just intricate patterns, they were symbols, glyphs, languages he didn't recognize. And as he traced one of the symbols with his thumb, a shiver ran through his body, as if the object itself had a pulse. He set the box down carefully, his mind racing. This was no ordinary artifact. It was something else entirely. But what? And why did it feel so familiar? It wasn't long before the whispering began again. This time, it was louder, clearer. The voices didn't seem to come from inside his head anymore. They were in the room with him. He could hear them, soft, insistent, like a distant murmur just below the threshold of hearing. "Get out," they said, one voice, then another, then a third, all layered together in a cacophony of dread. "You shouldn't be here." Elliot's heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickening as he spun around, searching for the source. But there was no one. The room was empty, silent, save for the voices that swirled around him, circling like a storm. He was alone, but he wasn't. Not anymore. He staggered backward, his mind frantically trying to make sense of it. The artifacts. The museum. What did it all mean? And why now? Why was he hearing these voices? His hand shook as he gripped the edge of the display case, staring at the box, the carvings now seeming to shift under his gaze. It was then that he noticed something that chilled him to the core. The symbols were moving. They were writhing, twisting like worms in the earth, and with every movement, they seemed to pull something from deep within him, some primal part of his soul that had been dormant, waiting to be unearthed. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. "It's time," the voices whispered, "time for you to join us." His stomach churned as he pulled his hands away from the box, his pulse hammering in his ears. "No," he muttered, shaking his head as if to clear away the madness. But it didn't stop. The whispering intensified, the voices now filling the entire room, echoing off the stone walls. Elliot had to get out. He had to leave. But as he turned toward the door, he froze. The hallway was dark, the light from the archives flickering and dimming as though the shadows themselves were coming alive. And in the distance, he saw something, a figure, just beyond the edge of the light. It was tall, thin, and dressed in a long, flowing cloak. Its face was hidden in shadow, but Elliot could feel its eyes on him, burning into his soul. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The figure stepped closer, its feet making no sound on the stone floor. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a rasping echo of the others. "Or join us forever." Elliot's heart raced as the air grew cold, the shadows creeping closer, swallowing the light. The room seemed to stretch, bending impossibly around him. And then, in the dark, he heard the voice again. It wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a scream. "Elliot," it cried, "come to us." His legs gave way beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor, the whispers crashing into him like waves. But through it all, one thought stood out, clear as day. He was no longer alone. Elliot Stone awoke with a start. His hands were trembling, his chest tight, as if the weight of 1,000 hands had pressed down on him in his sleep. He hadn't remembered falling unconscious, but the chilling grip of fear still clung to him like an icy fog. The whispers had ceased, but their presence remained, lingering in the back of his mind, like a phantom that wouldn't leave. It was still dark in the museum, and the air was thick with the oppressive weight of silence. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old building settling, its wooden floors groaning under the weight of time. Elliot had no idea how much time had passed, but it didn't matter. He knew one thing for certain: he had to leave. But as he tried to stand, his legs buckled beneath him. A sense of dread washed over him, as if something were watching, waiting. The room, dim and eerie, seemed to close in on him, and his mind spun, dizzy with the remnants of his nightmare. He took a deep breath, focusing on the present. The air was damp, cold even. There was no way he could leave now, not after what he'd seen, or thought he had seen. As he tried to make sense of his surroundings, his eyes fell on the door. But it wasn't just the door, it was the shadow standing beside it. The figure from before. It was impossible. He had been alone. But now, standing silently in the corner, its dark cloak swirling around it, was the same figure. A human shape, but distorted, elongated, as if it didn't quite fit the physical laws of the world. Its face was still obscured, but there was something unmistakable in its posture. It was waiting. Elliot's throat went dry. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, though his heartbeat was pounding in his ears. The figure didn't respond. Then, behind him, a voice called out, breaking the silence like a gunshot. "Leave it alone, boy." Elliot spun around, nearly tripping over his feet. Standing in the doorway was Henry Wren, the museum curator. But his usually frail and stoic figure now seemed taller, almost imposing. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and desperation. "No, no more!" Wren shouted, his voice quivering. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Elliot. You have no idea." The curator's words hit him like a cold slap in the face. Elliot could feel the tension building in the room, and for the first time since he had stepped into the museum, he began to understand the gravity of the situation. The weight of history, of time, of something far darker than the artifacts themselves, was pressing down on him. What's going on here, Henry?" Elliot asked, his voice strained, though the words barely escaped his lips. "What is this place? What are those voices? Who are you?" Wren shook his head, his expression clouded with regret. "You have to leave, Elliot. You have to get out before it's too late. Before they take you." Elliot could feel the unease gnawing at him. "Who will take me? What's happening here? What is this place really about?" The curator took a slow, deliberate step forward. His movements were deliberate, as if each motion pained him. "This museum, this is not just a collection of objects. These artifacts, these things, are not just objects, Elliot. They hold the souls of the damned. People who have crossed into this world and never left." Elliot's mind spun. He didn't want to believe what Wren was saying. It sounded insane. Yet, every piece of evidence in the museum pointed to something much more sinister than he had imagined. The whispers, the moving symbols, the feeling that something was watching him, it was all too real. "They are trapped," Wren continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "Trapped in the objects. They cannot move on. They cannot escape. And every time someone touches them, every time someone investigates them, it brings them closer, closer to freedom. The curator's words hit Elliot like a brick. The artifacts, those damn things, weren't just relics of the past. They were vessels. Vessels that held souls. Souls that could be freed, but only at a terrible cost. Freed? Freed by who? Elliot asked, though he already knew the answer. The figure in the corner, its presence was unmistakable. The souls, Rin whispered, they want you. They want your soul. You are the key, Elliot. The curator's words haunted Elliot as he stood in the darkened room. There was a heaviness in the air, a crushing force that made it feel as though the walls were closing in around him. He could feel the temperature drop, his breath misting in front of him. But it wasn't the cold that terrified him, it was the silence that followed. The figure in the corner hadn't moved, but its presence was undeniable. It was watching him, waiting. And the longer he stood there, the more the room seemed to warp, as if reality itself was being bent by the forces that had been awakened. Elliot took a hesitant step back, his mind racing. What do you mean by key, Henry? What does that mean? Ren's eyes darkened. You've already touched the box. You've already unlocked it. There's no going back now. The truth struck Elliot like a knife to the chest. He had done something he couldn't undo. He had opened a door that should never have been opened. And now, the museum, the objects, had claimed him. What happens now? Elliot asked, his voice barely audible. Ren looked at him with a mix of sorrow and resignation. Now, the others will come for you. The room seemed to pulse, the shadows shifting like living creatures. And then, for a split second, Elliot thought he saw a flicker, like a flash of movement, just at the edge of his vision. When he turned, there was nothing there. But the air felt heavier now, more oppressive. What do I do, Henry? Elliot begged, his voice rising in panic. Tell me what I need to do to stop this. Ren shook his head. There's nothing you can do now. You've already started the process. You've awakened them. And they will come for you, Elliot. They will take you into the darkness, where you will never see the light again. You will become one of them. A sharp, cold wind blew through the room, the temperature dropping even further. The shadows twisted and writhed, coiling around Elliot like serpents, and the whispers began again. Louder this time. Join us. Elliot's heart thudded in his chest. He had to get out. But the door was gone. He turned to face Ren, but the curator was gone. Disappeared, as if swallowed by the very walls of the museum. Elliot's breath hitched in his throat. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. He was alone. But then, the floor creaked behind him, and he spun around, his mind spinning in terror. The figure was closer now, standing directly in front of him, its cloak billowing as though caught in a gust of wind. And then, it spoke again, this time, louder, more urgent. Come to us, Elliot. The figure reached out with a hand, its fingers long and gnarled. And as it touched his arm, a rush of icy cold filled his veins. It was as if the touch itself had drained his very soul, pulling him into the darkness. No! Elliot shouted, struggling to break free. But the grip was unrelenting, and he could feel his strength fading. The shadows closed in, the whispers becoming a roar. And in that moment, Elliot realized that he wasn't just in a museum anymore. He was in a tomb. And he was the next soul to be trapped. The world spun around Elliot. His limbs felt like dead weight, his body unable to break free from the grip of the shadowed figure that now held him in an ironclad vice. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, a drumbeat growing louder with each passing second, as if his heart was trying to escape the suffocating darkness. But the more he fought, the more it consumed him. The cold seeped into his bones, and his breath came out in short, ragged gasps. The whispers filled his ears, louder, clearer now, like 1,000 voices, all crying out in unison, their words incomprehensible but filled with a terrible urgency. Come to us. Join us. Forever. It was like a chorus of tormented souls, each one trapped within these cursed walls, their essence bound to the museum and the artifacts they had once been a part of. They were here, in the shadows, in the very fabric of the air itself. They were everywhere, surrounding him. The whispers echoed from every corner, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was as if the entire building was alive, hungry, waiting for the last piece to fall into place. Elliot felt a pressure building in his chest, like his heart might explode. He wanted to scream, to run, but the figure's grip tightened, dragging him deeper into the darkness. He could no longer see clearly. The shadows had swallowed the light, leaving him in an abyss of shifting forms and unrelenting dread. His vision blurred, and his mind was becoming foggy, more distant from reality with each passing moment. But through the haze, a thought, one single thought, flickered in his mind. The box. The box that had started it all. The box he had opened. It had been placed on the pedestal at the center of the room, its contents shrouded in mystery. Elliot hadn't given much thought to it at first, but now he realized he hadn't just unlocked the artifact. He had set something in motion, something that had been waiting for centuries, lying dormant, waiting for a fool like him to come and disturb it. He couldn't stop them. The souls. The things that had been trapped within the museum's walls. But there was one thing he could still do. He could close the box. The thought filled him with a surge of determination, enough to break through the terror that was paralyzing his body. He had to close the box. He had to undo the damage. He had to end this before they took him completely. With all the strength he could muster, Elliot yanked his arm from the figure's grasp. The shadowed figure didn't fight back. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it let go, as if it was offering him one last chance. Elliot stumbled backward, his legs shaky, his vision still swimming with dark shadows, but he couldn't afford to stop. He couldn't let the museum win. He had come too far, seen too much. He had to end it. He sprinted toward the pedestal, his breath coming in gasps, his hands trembling as they reached out for the cursed box. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind, trying to drown him in their maddening chorus. The museum itself seemed to groan, as if the walls were closing in on him, wanting to devour him whole. Elliot's fingers brushed the edges of the box, and he froze. No going back. He had thought it would be easy. He had thought that once he closed it, once he sealed it, everything would stop. But as his fingers curled around the box's edge, a chill colder than anything he had felt before shot up his spine. His pulse raised as the temperature in the room plummeted. It was as if something far older, far darker than any of the souls trapped in the artifacts, was awakening, watching, waiting for him to make the wrong move. Elliot hesitated, but only for a second. He had no choice. This was the endgame. This was his only chance. With a sharp breath, he slammed the box shut, hoping, praying that he had made the right choice. The effect was instantaneous. A loud, guttural sound reverberated through the entire museum like a crack of thunder or roar of fury. The walls shook violently, as if the building itself was convulsing. The shadows screamed, their voices rising to a pitch that felt as though it could shatter his very bones. The whispers stopped. Elliot stood motionless, the box clenched tightly in his hands. His body ached, his chest tight with the weight of the moment. The room was silent now. Too silent. As if the museum itself was holding its breath. The figure was gone. The shadows had receded. The air felt different. No longer cold, but strangely empty. Elliot looked down at the box in his hands. It was still sealed. The artifacts no longer hummed with that terrible, malignant energy. The voices had vanished. For the first time since entering the museum, Elliot felt something other than terror. It was a kind of peace, though it was fleeting. He had sealed them away. The souls. The artifacts. The curse. But then, a voice, soft but unmistakable, whispered from the depths of his mind. Not for long. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. His vision blurred again, the shadows returning. His body stiffened. He looked around, but there was nothing there. No figure. No curator. Just the empty, haunted museum. And then he understood. The museum had never been about keeping the souls trapped inside. It had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a waiting room. A place where souls waited for the next visitor to open the box. To release them. Elliot had played right into their hands. And though he had thought he had sealed the darkness away, it had merely retreated. The curse was not over. It had only just begun. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was not the one who had been saved. He was the one who had become the next prisoner. The museum had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. And as the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent, Elliot knew he would never leave. The last thing he heard before the darkness consumed him completely was the voice from the box, now speaking clearly, as if it had always been there. Welcome home. Story 2. Mia wasn't supposed to be out this late. But then, no one had told her the rules about the playground. No one had warned her about what happened after midnight. She had stumbled across the park a week ago on a dare from her friends. The old playground at the edge of town, the one no one talked about, just a quiet stretch of land, dark and forgotten. They said it appeared only after midnight, like some bizarre mirage. It wasn't on any map, didn't show up in town records. It wasn't supposed to exist at all. And yet, Mia found herself standing there now, under the dull yellow light of the street lamp that flickered like a tired heart. Her sneakers shuffled against the damp grass as she looked across the empty, desolate space, a chill running down her spine. The air smelled different here, heavier, thicker, as though the world around her had been held in stasis for too long. The swings creaked in the wind, a hollow, lonesome sound that made her shiver. At first, everything had seemed normal. She had walked through the park gate just like any other, the usual dark shapes of rusted play equipment casting long shadows in the moonlight. But as the clock had ticked past midnight, things had started to change. Slowly, imperceptibly. The sound of distant laughter echoed, not the laughter of children playing, but something darker. Something out of place. Her heartbeat quickened as she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, just a side effect of too many late nights and too many horror stories. But there was something about this park. Something wrong. She could feel it now, a creeping sensation at the back of her neck, as though someone was watching her from the darkness, hidden just out of sight. She hesitated, standing still in the middle of the playground, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that was beginning to gnaw at her. The swings swayed back and forth, though there was no breeze. The air felt stagnant, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Mia," a voice whispered from the darkness. She froze. It was her name. But she was alone. She hadn't told anyone she'd be here tonight. Slowly, she turned toward the source of the sound. There, at the far edge of the playground, near the old carousel, something moved. A figure, tall, shadowy, and indistinct. Just a silhouette against the inky blackness, but it was enough to send her heart into her throat. "Mia." The voice was closer now, more insistent. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get away, but her feet refused to obey. The figure stepped forward into the dim light. It was a child. A small boy, no older than 5 or 6, his face pale and vacant. His eyes were wide, too wide, empty, like the eyes of a doll. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the fabric ragged, stained with something dark. "Mia, you're supposed to play with us," the boy said, his voice too calm for a child. A cold sweat ran down Mia's back. She forced her legs to move, stepping back, inching toward the exit, but the boy didn't follow. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on her, unmoving. The laughter came again, louder this time, surrounding her like 100 voices rising from the shadows. Her heart hammered in her chest. Something wasn't right. The park was never supposed to exist. She had come here out of curiosity, but now she was beginning to wish she had never stepped foot on this cursed ground. Mia's eyes darted around the playground, searching for any sign of movement, any sign that this nightmare was a figment of her imagination. But no matter where she looked, the same figure, the same eerie presence, lingered, watching her from the edge of the swings, from behind the carousel, from the corners of her vision. The boy was gone now, or perhaps he had never been there. But the unease remained, a dark presence that seemed to seep into every corner of the park. She could feel the pressure of the silence around her, a silence so thick it almost hurt to breathe. She was not alone. The sound of the swing creaking again broke her thoughts, and she spun around. The seat was moving, slowly, gently, as though an invisible force was pushing it back and forth, rocking in time with her racing heartbeat. She didn't know why she stayed. Maybe it was the strange pull, the compulsion to find out what was happening here, to unravel the mystery. Or maybe it was the fear of being alone, lost in the emptiness of her own mind. Whatever the reason, Mia found herself walking back toward the center of the park, drawn to the strange forces at play here. Her steps were measured, almost cautious, as she approached the carousel. She could still hear the faint whispers of laughter in the air, carried on the breeze. But there was no one in sight. The carousel stood at the farthest corner of the park, its chipped, faded horses frozen in place, as though they were waiting for something. Mia reached out for one of the handles, its cold metal biting into her skin. Her eyes locked onto the face of one of the wooden horses. It was smiling, but it wasn't a smile that reassured her. It was a grin, wide and unnerving, painted in peeling layers of chipped paint. And then, suddenly, she felt a tug at her sleeve. She spun around, but there was no one there. "Mia, don't leave," the voice whispered again, just behind her. But this time, the voice wasn't coming from the boy. It was coming from the very ground beneath her feet, as though the earth itself was speaking. Her pulse quickened. She turned and bolted toward the exit. But as she reached the gate, she saw it. A shadow, dark as night, stretching across the playground, its edges sharp and undefined. It moved. It crept toward her. And in the darkness, Mia knew. It was watching her. Waiting. Mia ran. Her feet barely touched the ground as she bolted toward the park's exit, but the gate was farther than she remembered. The shadows behind her stretched and distorted as if the very darkness itself were alive, following her, twisting and shifting. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat, the rhythmic sound syncing with her frantic steps. She could feel it, a heavy, oppressive presence behind her. Every step forward felt as if the ground were pulling her back, like invisible fingers clutching at her ankles. The laughter had stopped, but the absence of sound was more terrifying than any noise. It was as if the world around her had gone mute, holding its breath. She reached for the gate, but it wasn't there. Her hands grasped empty air where the wrought iron should have been. Panic surged within her, a cold, suffocating panic that made her chest tighten. She whipped around, her eyes scanning the park once more. There was no sign of the boy, no sign of the creeping darkness that had followed her. But she could still feel its weight pressing down on her shoulders, the chill in the air suffocating her. The playground, which had once seemed like an innocent, forgotten space, now felt like a trap. The swing creaked again, louder this time, and her eyes were drawn to it despite herself. The seat swung back and forth at an unnatural pace, as if being pushed by invisible hands. The emptiness surrounding it made the motion seem even more unnatural, like a mockery of life. "Mia." The voice was close again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was clear, sharp, and it echoed in the silence like a bell tolling in the dead of night. She turned and found herself facing the carousel again. But something had changed. The horses, once still and lifeless, were now twisting in circles, their bodies jerking in strange, erratic motions. Their painted faces were all grotesque grins, their eyes following her as she stumbled backward, paralyzed by the horrific sight. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. The shadow. It moved across the playground, not just creeping along the edges like before, but actively shifting, flowing toward her. It was no longer confined to the boundaries of the park. It was in the park, a tangible thing, pulsing with a dark energy. Her breath caught in her throat, her body locked in place as the shadow swirled closer. It wasn't a shadow cast by the moon, nor was it a trick of the light. It was something alive. Something hungry. "Why don't you stay, Mia?" the voice repeated, but this time it was not the child's voice. It was deeper, older, and far more sinister. "We just want to play." Mia stumbled back, barely able to tear her eyes from the creeping mass of shadow that now loomed in front of her. It had a shape, though it was ever shifting, ever changing. One moment it resembled a figure, tall and thin with elongated limbs. The next, it melted into a mass of writhing blackness, like ink bleeding into water. "Stay," it whispered again, its voice threading through her mind like a slow, insidious poison. It wasn't just a playground she was afraid of now. It was the presence. The thing that lurked in the dark, the thing that hungered for her. She could feel it in her bones, in the marrow of her very soul. It was watching her, waiting for her to move, to react. Mia turned away, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her chest tight with fear. She had to get out. She had to. A scream pierced the air, and Mia froze. The sound came from the carousel. A blood-curdling, high-pitched scream, as though someone, or something, was being torn apart. Mia's stomach twisted. She didn't want to look. She knew she shouldn't look. But she couldn't help it. She turned her head, and her eyes locked on the carousel once again. The horses, which had been turning erratically before, were now frozen, their once cheerful, painted faces replaced by something far darker. The faces were twisted, their eyes wide and hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. And standing in the center of the carousel was a figure, tall, gaunt, and shadowed. The figure wore a long coat that seemed to be stitched from the very darkness surrounding it, and its hands were raised, clutching at the air as if reaching for her. Mia's heart lurched in her chest. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She could only stare as the figure's head slowly turned toward her. And then, its lips parted. "Mia," it said, its voice a low growl, as though dragged from the very pits of hell. "You belong here now." Mia didn't wait for it to say anything more. Her body screamed at her to run, but she was frozen. Her feet wouldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the figure as it took a step forward, its long, shadowy limbs moving unnaturally, like something out of a nightmare. The carousel began to turn again, slowly at first, then picking up speed, the horses twisting in unnatural angles, their heads lolling and their eyes locked on her. The shadows writhed around her, closing in, pressing against her skin like a suffocating fog. The whispering voices returned, growing louder and louder, filling her head until she thought it would explode. Her name. Over and over again, in 100 different voices, echoing, distorting, as if the very park were alive, feeding off her fear. "You belong here now." Mia's mind spun. Her thoughts fractured, twisted, like a shattered mirror. This wasn't real. None of this was real. She had to be dreaming. Had to be. But even as she thought it, the reality of it, the weight of the air, the oppressive sense of being trapped, suffocated her. She wasn't dreaming. This was real. The park was real. The shadows were real. And something else, something darker, had been waiting for her. As the figure took another step, Mia felt a cold hand press against her chest, pulling her forward. She gasped, struggling against it, but the shadows wrapped around her, tightening like chains. And just when she thought she couldn't take it any longer, a voice broke through the darkness. "Mia, you can still leave." She blinked, her breath shaky, her mind reeling. Who was that? What was happening? She turned, eyes searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Just shadows and silence. The figure, still standing near the carousel, tilted its head, watching her with those terrible, hollow eyes. And then it spoke again. You can still leave, Mia. But not for long. And then, just like that, the shadows receded and the park was still. The park was quiet again. Too quiet. Mia stood in the middle of the playground, her breath shaky, her body drenched in sweat. Her mind was a storm of confusion and fear. Had she imagined it? The shadow figure? The whispers? The carousel spinning like it had a mind of its own? Her hands trembled as she wiped her forehead, trying to steady herself. But no matter how much she told herself it wasn't real, her skin still felt cold from the touch of something unseen, something otherworldly. She needed to leave. Mia turned around, her feet finally able to move. But as she walked toward the exit, she noticed something strange. The path seemed to stretch out farther than before. The gate was still there, but it was no longer close. It felt as though the distance between her and freedom had grown. The night air pressed in, thick with something that didn't belong, something ancient, hungry. Her breath quickened. Panic was creeping back in. She wasn't sure what was real anymore. She was starting to feel like she was trapped in a dream, one that she couldn't wake up from, no matter how hard she tried. And then, just as her hand touched the cold metal of the gate, she heard it. A laugh. Soft. High-pitched. Familiar. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. There, standing near the center of the park, was the boy, the one who had called her name earlier. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, wide and unblinking, like black marbles. He was smiling, but it wasn't a smile she recognized. It was sharp, predatory, and it made Mia's blood run cold. You didn't think it was over, did you? He said, his voice a haunting echo in the stillness. Mia's heart raced, her mind screaming at her to run. She didn't want to look at him, but she couldn't tear her gaze away. His form seemed to blur, flicker like a malfunctioning TV screen, but his voice, his words, they pierced her like a needle. It never ends here, Mia, he whispered, stepping closer. Once you're part of the playground, you belong to it. Forever. The world around her seemed to distort, the trees stretching, the swings creaking. Everything in the park began to shimmer, as if it were on the edge of collapsing into something darker, something worse. No! Mia screamed, slamming her hand against the gate. But it wouldn't budge. The gate had turned into a wall of solid darkness, impenetrable, unyielding. The boy stepped forward again, his smile widening unnaturally. The playground is always watching, he said. You can't escape. Mia's mind spun. The boy was wrong. She could escape. She had to. But the more she thought about it, the more she doubted herself. Had the boy truly been real? Or was he another trick of the playground, a twisted illusion designed to break her mind? She glanced back at the swings, and for a fleeting moment, she could have sworn the shadows moved, stretching out like fingers reaching for her. Then, she heard it again, the same voice from before, echoing across the empty park. It was no longer a whisper. Now, it was a roar, a sound that vibrated in her bones. Stay with us." Mia spun around, but no one was there. The playground had a life of its own, she realized. It wasn't just a place, it was a sentient thing. It watched. It waited. It chose who would stay and who would leave. And right now, Mia wasn't sure if she would be allowed to walk away. Her knees went weak and she stumbled, falling to the ground. She felt as though her mind was being pulled in 1,000 different directions, each thought, each fear, clawing at her from the inside. The laughter came again, louder now. It wasn't the boy's laugh anymore. This one was older, deeper, more sinister. It sounded like it came from the carousel, from the very earth beneath her feet. And as she looked at the twisted figures on the carousel, she realized something terrible. The figures weren't just painted on the horses. They were living. They were staring at her with hollow eyes, their mouths silently screaming, begging for release. The laughter echoed again. It wasn't coming from the boy. It was coming from the playground itself. Her body trembled as she staggered to her feet. She couldn't escape. Not from the park, not from the terror that had taken hold of her mind. The lines between what was real and what was illusion had blurred, and Mia wasn't sure if she would ever be able to separate them again. The carousel began to turn faster now, the horses jerking in unnatural rhythms, their painted eyes glowing. Mia's breath caught in her throat as a shape emerged from the center of the spinning ride. It was the figure. The one she had seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't standing still. It was moving toward her. The figure came closer, its long coat trailing behind it, its fingers like claws that seemed to elongate with every step. The wind picked up, howling through the playground as if in response to its arrival. The shadows grew, wrapping themselves around the park like a living thing, pulling at her, tugging at her soul. Mia wanted to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. Her body refused to obey her. Every part of her wanted to run, to escape, but the park had a hold on her now. It had claimed her, just as it had claimed the boy, just as it had claimed everyone else before them. The figure stopped in front of her, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It tilted its head, observing her like a specimen. "You've been chosen," it said, its voice like sandpaper against her ears. "The playground is alive, Mia. It has been for as long as anyone can remember. And now it wants you." The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. Mia felt the weight of it pressing on her chest, suffocating her. She wanted to fight back, to scream, to do anything, but her body refused to move. The figure's hands reached for her, and she felt herself being pulled toward it. "You can't leave," it whispered. "No one ever does." And as the figure's cold fingers wrapped around her wrist, Mia realized with a sickening certainty that she had become a part of the playground, a prisoner of its endless night. The world around her dissolved into darkness. The carousel spun faster, the horses' screams growing louder, the shadows consuming everything. And Mia understood, with a terrible clarity, that the playground didn't just want her, it needed her. And she would never leave. Mia's mind had gone numb, a hollow emptiness where terror once was. She could no longer feel her limbs, only the cold grip of the figure pulling her into the center of the park. The shadowed figures on the carousel turned faster, their grotesque faces now clear in the moonlight. They weren't merely painted, they were alive, bodies of children long forgotten, trapped in time, and woven into the very fabric of the playground. Her vision blurred as she was dragged through the park, past the swing set where the rusted chains clattered in the wind. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and grow heavier with each step, as though the earth itself was devouring her. The night around her twisted, folding into itself like an endless labyrinth. "There's no escape," the figure's voice echoed, hollow and final. "This is where you'll stay, forever." Mia wanted to scream, to fight back, but no words formed. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tightening as the darkness pressed in on her from all sides. The figure had released her wrist, but it didn't matter. She was tethered to this place now. Something pulled her toward the center of the park, toward the carousel, as if her body had been enslaved to the very air itself. The playground was alive. It was waiting. "Do you hear them?" the figure asked. "The voices of those who came before you? They call to you. They are all here, Mia." And then she heard it, the faint, desperate cries of children. Not the playful screams of joy one would expect to hear in a park, but something far darker. These were screams of torment, of fear, of souls trapped in the eternal grip of the playground. The carousel spun faster, its music now a discordant symphony of madness. The horses' eyes glowed, their mouths open in silent screams. Mia's mind screamed at her to move, to run, but the ground felt like quicksand. She couldn't move. She was rooted to this spot, a spectator to the twisted fate that awaited her. The figure stepped closer, and the world around her began to shift. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and she felt herself being pulled into the center of the carousel, as though it were a vortex swallowing her whole. Her feet were no longer touching the ground. She felt weightless, suspended in the air as if gravity itself had abandoned her. The carousel's horses seemed to loom over her now, their skeletal bodies twisting and bending in unnatural ways. The figure's voice grew louder, more insistent, as though it were pressing into her very mind. "You will never escape, Mia. Not now. Not ever." Suddenly, Mia's surroundings warped again. She was no longer in the park, no longer in the carousel. She was somewhere else. A place that felt even older, as if it had existed long before time itself. The air was thick, choking, the oppressive weight of something ancient pressing down on her. Around her were the shadows of other children, their faces frozen in terror, their bodies disjointed, as if they were caught mid-motion. And then, the most chilling realization hit her. They were the ones who had come before her. The children who had been trapped in the park, lost to its hunger. They were now part of the playground, part of its twisted cycle. The figure, no longer a mere silhouette, now stood before her in full form. Its features were monstrous, eyes black as coal, its face a twisted mask of glee and malice. "This is the true nature of the playground," the figure said, its voice now dripping with satisfaction. "It's not just a place, it's a living entity. And every child that steps foot in it, every soul that is drawn here, becomes a part of its eternal game. We are all bound to it. Forever." The ground beneath her trembled, and Mia felt herself drawn toward a deep pit in the center of the shadowy space. The pit was an abyss, endless and consuming, the walls slick with darkness. She could feel the pull, like an invisible hand dragging her toward it. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I don't want to be part of this. I won't be." But it didn't matter. The pull was too strong. The fear, too overwhelming. "You have no choice," the figure whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "You are already a part of it." Mia closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable fall into the void. But before she could feel the cold grip of the pit consume her, something unexpected happened. Mia opened her eyes again, only to find herself back at the entrance to the playground. The gate was no longer dark and forbidding, but was now illuminated by soft moonlight. The carousel had stopped spinning, and the park was eerily quiet. She rubbed her eyes, trying to clear her vision, but nothing made sense. Had she imagined it all? Had the figure been a hallucination? She looked around. The swing swayed gently in the breeze, the slide stood silent under the moonlight. Her breath was ragged, but the cold grip of fear was gone. She was free. Or so she thought. As she turned to leave, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Mia froze, a cold chill rushing up her spine. She didn't dare turn around. She already knew who it was. "I told you, Mia," the voice whispered, almost too softly to hear. "No one ever leaves." Slowly, Mia turned. Behind her stood the figure once more, its grin stretching unnaturally wide. And then, the ground beneath her feet gave way. The world collapsed. She fell, spiraling into the darkness below, her scream lost to the wind. The playground watched in silence. The eternal game had claimed another soul. Story 3. Dr. Edward Morrow's clinic was a clean, efficient establishment that seemed almost too perfect: sterile floors, white walls, and the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. Everything had its place. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above him was the only sound that punctuated the stillness of the late evening hours. Morrow was used to long shifts, and he had always taken pride in his work as a surgeon. He had saved many lives, performed countless procedures, and worked tirelessly to ensure his patients left with a sense of relief. But tonight, the stillness felt unnatural. He looked at the clock hanging on the wall, its ticking loud against the silence. It was well past midnight, and his last patient had been gone for over an hour. The clinic was empty except for the janitor, who had long since left for the night. Morrow was just finishing his paperwork, planning to head home when he felt it, a strange, creeping sense of unease. As he stretched and pushed his chair back, preparing to lock up, he heard a faint knock at the door. Morrow blinked, confused. No one had been scheduled for a late appointment. He stood up and walked to the door, expecting to see the janitor or perhaps a stray visitor, but what he found was far more unsettling. A woman stood in the hallway, pale and thin. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and she wore a hospital gown, though it looked old, faded, and frayed. Her hair was unkempt, and there was a strange, almost unnatural quality to her presence. Morrow felt a chill run down his spine. "Dr. Morrow?" Her voice was soft, but urgent. "Please, I need your help." Dr. Morrow stood frozen at the door, unsure of how to react. He was no stranger to late-night visits, emergency cases, patients in distress, or perhaps even the occasional desperate family member. But something about this woman felt wrong. The way she looked at him, her eyes, vacant yet pleading, sent a chill deep into his bones. She took a hesitant step forward, her movements slow and almost too deliberate. There was an odd sense of familiarity in her gaze, as though she had been here before, perhaps many times, but Morrow couldn't place where or when. "Are you a patient?" he asked, his voice cautious but calm. "Do you need help?" Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. But I don't think it's the kind of help you're used to giving. I need you to perform one last procedure. Just one last thing, and I'll be whole again." Morrow's heart skipped a beat. The words were cryptic, filled with an urgency that made him uncomfortable. He was used to the desperation of patients asking for treatments, but this was different. Something in her tone, something in her eyes, spoke of a deep, almost unnatural need. "I don't understand," Morrow said, trying to hide the unease creeping into his voice. "What kind of procedure? And why come to me?" She stepped closer, and Morrow instinctively took a step back. Her breath, though faint, seemed to echo in the quiet clinic, and he noticed that she was shivering. Yet there was no cold air. The chill wasn't from the temperature, it was something else. Something that seeped into his bones, making his skin crawl. "I've been waiting," she said, her voice soft and broken. "For you. For this moment." Dr. Morrow led her into the examination room, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. He had seen all manner of cases in his years as a surgeon, from the straightforward to the bizarre, but nothing like this. The woman's strange behavior, her cryptic words, none of it made any logical sense. He gestured for her to sit on the examination table, his hands trembling slightly as he set his medical kit down. "I'm going to check you over. Let's start with your vitals," he said, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the unsettling nature of the encounter. She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking. As he checked her pulse, Morrow was surprised to find that her heartbeat was faint, barely perceptible. He moved his stethoscope to her chest, but there was no steady rhythm, no familiar thrum of life. There was only silence. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, his voice now tinged with concern. "Do you have any medical conditions I should know about?" Her lips parted, but it was as if the words didn't want to come out. She stared at him, unblinking, for a long moment. The silence between them stretched, unnerving. I'm not like the others," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I'm not alive, not anymore. But you can fix it, can't you?" Morrow felt a jolt of shock. Not alive? What was she saying? He stepped back, his mind racing, trying to rationalize the situation. But as he looked at her, something in her eyes, something in the air itself, felt off. Like the weight of something ancient and forgotten was pressing down on him. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that Morrow could see his breath fog in the air. The lights flickered above him, casting strange shadows on the walls. He looked around, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. There was something wrong, something he couldn't explain. "Where are you from?" Morrow asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you get here?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her hands and began to undo the buttons of her hospital gown, revealing pale, almost translucent skin beneath. Morrow's heart raced as he saw a strange pattern of dark bruises around her neck, bruises that looked almost like fingerprints, as if someone had strangled her. Before he could speak, the woman turned her head to one side, and Morrow's eyes followed the movement. His breath caught in his throat as he saw something that made his stomach churn. There, just beyond the doorway, was a shadow moving, dark and formless, as if it were waiting for her. Suddenly, the woman smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know me, Dr. Morrow," she said softly, her voice now oddly familiar, as if it had been waiting for him to hear it. "You've seen me before, haven't you?" And before Morrow could reply, everything around him plunged into darkness. Dr. Edward Morrow stood frozen in the dark. The room felt colder than it ever had before. He blinked rapidly, trying to adjust his eyes to the complete lack of light. His heart raced, a pulse hammering in his throat. He was certain that only moments ago, the woman had been standing right in front of him. Yet, as he reached out, his hands brushed nothing but air. There was no sound, no breath, no movement. "Hello?" Morrow called into the darkness, his voice unnervingly small in the empty room. His words felt like they were swallowed by the oppressive quiet that had settled in. He fumbled for the light switch, his hands trembling. Finally, he found it and flipped it on, blinking against the sudden harshness of the fluorescent bulbs. But when his eyes cleared, the woman was gone. The examination room was as pristine as it had been before her arrival. The cold, clinical atmosphere was unchanged, and there was no sign of the strange patient who had stood before him just seconds ago. Morrow's breath came in short gasps. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the perspiration that had gathered on his forehead. "Was I imagining things?" he muttered under his breath. "Am I losing my mind?" His heart still raced, and his hands felt clammy as he checked his pulse. The woman, the strange figure in the hospital gown, couldn't have disappeared like that. It was impossible. But no matter how much he searched the room, there was no trace of her. The cold air lingered, the temperature still unnaturally low. Morrow stood in the center of the room, unsure of what to do next. Something inside him gnawed at him, the instinct that something far worse than just a simple patient's visit had occurred. He needed answers, but he had no idea where to begin. Back in his office, Dr. Morrow tried to calm his racing mind. He sat at his desk, trying to focus on the paperwork he had been finishing before the strange woman's arrival, but the events of the night had unsettled him. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, almost unconsciously dialing his closest friend and colleague, Dr. Rebecca Carter. "Rebecca," Morrow said the moment she picked up. His voice was strained. "Something's wrong. Something happened here tonight. I need you to come down to the clinic." "Edward? What's going on?" "You sound strange," Rebecca replied, concern creeping into her voice. She knew Edward well enough to know when something was off. I don't know how to explain it," he stammered. "I had a patient, but she wasn't like the others. There's something about her. It's like she wasn't alive. It's as if—" "Edward, slow down," Rebecca interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Take a deep breath. Who is this patient? And why do you sound so shaken?" Morrow sighed, feeling the weight of his confusion. "I can't explain it. It was like she wasn't really here, like I was seeing a ghost. And the things she said—" His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard. "She asked me to perform a procedure. But she was already dead. Her skin was cold. And the moment I turned around to get something, she was gone. No trace. Nothing. There was silence on the other end of the phone for a long moment. "Edward," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm, "you're probably just exhausted. You've been working long hours. I know how you get when you're overworked. Just go home. Get some rest. I'll check in on you tomorrow, all right?" But Morrow wasn't convinced. Something inside him screamed that there was more to it than that. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just tired. He was in danger. Something had happened here, something unnatural. But before he could respond, the phone call was abruptly cut off. The screen flickered once and then went dark. Morrow stared at the phone in disbelief. He checked the battery, 100%, no issues. He tried to call Rebecca again, but the line went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. After hanging up, Morrow decided to leave the clinic for the night. The sooner he could get away from the place, the better. But as he stood, ready to head out, his eyes caught sight of something, a flicker of movement just outside the office window. He froze, every instinct on high alert. Outside, the parking lot was bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights. There were no cars in the lot. It was late. Yet, in the farthest corner, just beyond the boundary of the clinic's security lights, something moved. Something dark. Morrow's stomach turned, and he moved closer to the window. He squinted into the shadows, his heart hammering. Then he saw it, a figure standing in the distance, its features indistinct in the dark. A shape, standing motionless, staring at the clinic. His breath hitched. It was the woman. Her hospital gown swayed in the wind, and her pale, ghostly figure was barely visible, but unmistakable. She was watching him, waiting. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and the figure disappeared. Morrow's pulse quickened as he rushed to the door, intending to confront whatever was outside. But as he stepped into the hallway, the air seemed heavier. The temperature had dropped again, colder than before. The lights flickered above him once more, and for a moment, everything went still. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate, echoing in the otherwise silent hall. Morrow turned around slowly, dread creeping up his spine. The footsteps were close now, too close. And yet, there was no one there. The fear that had been building in him all night was now overwhelming, threatening to drown him. His mind raced, trying to rationalize what he was experiencing. Was he losing his mind? Was it all just stress? Then, a voice spoke from the darkness. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, more insistent. "Dr. Morrow," it said, the words drawing his attention like a magnet. "Help me." It was the woman. But this time, her voice wasn't just a whisper. It was a demand, a plea that he could not ignore. The voice grew more frantic as the footsteps grew louder. "I need you," she repeated, each word drenched in desperation. "Please, fix me." Morrow's breathing became shallow, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He couldn't run from this. This was his responsibility, wasn't it? As a doctor, he was supposed to help people, to fix them. But this wasn't normal. It was wrong. He wasn't prepared for this kind of thing. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman, this ghost, wasn't going to let him leave until he did exactly what she wanted. The room grew darker, the air colder. The footsteps were now right behind him. Dr. Morrow couldn't breathe. The air around him felt thick, stifling. Each breath came in shallow gasps as the footsteps drew closer. The woman, her figure barely visible in the darkened hallway, was now just feet away from him. He could feel the cold emanating from her, a chill that sank deep into his bones. "Please." "Dr. Morrow," the voice pleaded again, so soft, but filled with an aching need. "Help me." His instinct screamed at him to run, to escape this nightmare that was slowly consuming him. But his feet remained frozen in place, like he was bound by invisible threads. Every part of his mind screamed at him to turn around, to make a dash for the door, but something held him there, something darker, more compelling. The light above flickered again, casting the hallway in an eerie, uneven glow. Dr. Morrow's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But the hallway stretched on too long, the shadows too deep. It felt like a labyrinth with no end, and he was trapped inside it. Without warning, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. It was ice cold, like death itself, and he jerked back in shock, almost stumbling. He spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the overwhelming sense of being watched. "Are you going to help me?" The voice was sharper now, almost demanding. Dr. Morrow turned back, his head spinning. He had no idea what was happening. His body moved of its own accord, and before he could stop himself, he found himself walking toward the examination room, drawn by an invisible force. The woman's pleading voice echoed in his head, getting louder, more insistent. She was calling for him, needing him. But how could he help her? She was dead, wasn't she? No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the closer he got to the room, the more the air felt like it was closing in around him. His chest tightened with every step, his pulse roaring in his ears. Something terrible was about to happen. The examination room had never felt so sinister. The sterile smell of antiseptic now seemed suffocating, and the overhead lights buzzed, casting a faint, flickering glow. Dr. Morrow approached the examination table, his hand shaking violently as he reached for the instruments laid out before him. He had been in this room 1,000 times before, performing routine surgeries, administering life-saving procedures, but this felt different. This was not a patient in need of medical care. This was a ghost, a specter, demanding something from him. But what? His fingers hovered over the scalpel, his mind struggling to regain control. He was a doctor. He had taken an oath to do no harm, to heal, not to be dragged into madness. Yet, here he was, standing on the precipice of something unthinkable. He turned back, and for the first time, he truly saw her. The woman was standing by the door now, her hospital gown tattered, her skin a pale, lifeless hue. Her eyes, those hollow, pleading eyes, were locked onto his, a gaze that seemed to burn into his very soul. "You have to fix me," she whispered, her voice echoing in his skull. "You have to complete the surgery." Dr. Morrow blinked, his vision blurring. His head was pounding, his thoughts fragmented. His breath came out in jagged bursts as he struggled to maintain his focus. The scalpel in his hand felt heavier, like it was drawing him toward the procedure he knew he couldn't perform. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman stepped closer, her feet dragging across the floor like they were made of stone. The procedure, Dr. Morrow. You know what to do. She reached out, her hand icy cold as she placed it on his wrist. Her touch sent a jolt of electricity through him, the shock so powerful it made him stagger back. The room spun around him, and he felt like he was losing control, losing himself. Please, I beg you, the woman pleaded, her voice now shrill and desperate. I can't rest. I can't move on until it's done. Dr. Morrow closed his eyes, trying to block out the terror that gripped him. His mind screamed at him to let go, to walk away, but his hands were moving of their own accord, bringing the scalpel to her chest. He couldn't stop them. He couldn't stop himself. The blade sliced through the air, and for a brief moment, everything stood still. The world seemed to freeze, suspended in time. Then, the reality hit him. The woman's body, her skin, wasn't human. It wasn't real. Beneath her hospital gown, there was nothing but darkness. A swirling void, like a bottomless pit, stretched inside her chest where her heart should have been. He staggered back in horror, the scalpel falling from his trembling hands. The woman's body twitched as if it was being held together by invisible strings, and the darkness inside her seemed to pulse, like something was reaching out from within. No, Morrow gasped. No, this can't be happening. You're not real. But the woman's eyes, those hollow eyes, burned with an intensity that chilled him to the bone. She was staring at him, not as a victim seeking help, but as a force, an entity, demanding that he finish what had already been started. Morrow's mind reeled. He tried to piece together the fragments of his memories, but they were slipping away like sand through his fingers. His past. His surgeries. His patience. There was something he had forgotten, something important. And then it came to him. The woman, she wasn't the first. There had been others, patients who had come to him in the dead of night, asking for the same thing. For a procedure. For a cure. For something that had long since passed. They had been dying when they arrived, their bodies ravaged by something unseen. Something unnatural. But Morrow had never asked the questions. He had never questioned why they came to him in the dead of night. He had simply performed the surgeries as he had always done, like a dutiful surgeon. He had believed in the illusion of healing, of helping, without understanding the terrible cost. The darkness inside the woman's chest seemed to grow, expanding, swirling faster now. Morrow could feel it pulling him in, tugging at his very soul. He could hear her voice again, louder now, echoing through the room, through his mind. You must finish the surgery, Dr. Morrow, she urged, her voice no longer pleading, but commanding. It's the only way for me to rest. But Morrow understood now. He had been trapped in a cycle, performing surgeries for ghosts, for spirits that couldn't pass on, because he had never questioned them. He had been their last hope, but now he was their prison. His mind screamed in terror as the room seemed to close in around him. He had made a choice. And now, there was no way out. The scalpel felt heavy in his hand once more. His fingers tightened around it, even as his mind screamed to stop. But it was too late. The final procedure had already begun. Dr. Morrow's breath quickened as his fingers gripped the scalpel. He couldn't stop himself. It was as though the instrument was an extension of his own flesh, his body no longer answering to his mind, but to the growing, suffocating pressure of the force that had taken control of him. The woman, this apparition, this specter, was staring at him, her hollow eyes wide with expectation. The room had become suffocating, the air thick with the scent of decay and antiseptic. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows distorting and twisting like dark hands reaching out to claim him. His thoughts spun in circles, trying desperately to cling to reality, but it was slipping through his fingers. The woman's voice had softened now, almost affectionate. "It's time, Doctor. Just one last cut." His pulse raced. He could feel the cold weight of the scalpel in his hand, and for a moment he wondered if he could just drop it, let it fall from his fingers. But as if answering his unspoken thought, the scalpel seemed to grow heavier, more insistent. The force inside him was too powerful now to resist. A sound broke through the air, a soft scraping sound, as if nails were being dragged along a chalkboard. It echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls and scraping against his skull, a sound that made his teeth ache. He turned, eyes wild with panic, but there was no one else there. Only the woman. The darkness in her chest pulsed again, this time in rhythm with his own racing heartbeat. It felt as though someone, was breathing in the space between them, just beyond the veil of reality. His breath came in ragged gasps as his gaze was drawn back to her empty stare. This wasn't a patient. She wasn't even human anymore. And yet, he could not stop himself. It was as if he was bound to her by invisible chains. Suddenly, the world around him seemed to snap back into focus. His vision cleared, and the sharp, all-consuming dread began to recede just slightly. For the first time in what felt like days, Dr. Morrow could think clearly. He remembered something buried deep in the recesses of his mind, something he had long ago locked away. There was a time, years ago, when he had begun to experiment with unconventional surgeries. A time when his hunger for knowledge and power had driven him to perform procedures he couldn't explain. He had cut into the very fabric of life and death, tampering with forces far beyond his understanding. The patients who had come to him, these shadows of the living, had been drawn to him, not because he could save them, but because he was the only one capable of performing the impossible. And now, they were asking for something far darker than any surgery. They weren't asking for help, they were demanding it. They were demanding that he complete the procedure that had begun years ago, the one he had walked away from in fear. The one that should have never been attempted. But the consequences of his actions were far-reaching. The spirits of those who had died in his operating room were now trapped, unable to move on, bound to the place where their last breaths had been taken. And he, Dr. Morrow, was the one who had kept them there. By performing their last surgeries, he had tied their souls to him, to his clinic, and now they would never leave. He had been playing God, and now the price of his arrogance had come due. Dr. Morrow stood frozen, the scalpel heavy in his hand. The woman's cold eyes never left him, her gaze unwavering, like a magnet pulling him in. He could feel his mind unraveling with every passing second, and yet he knew this was the moment of truth. He could walk away. He could turn and flee from the room, from the nightmare he had created. But the air around him grew thick again, pressing down on him with a suffocating weight. The darkness in the woman's chest seemed to draw him in, calling him forward. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape, but something deeper, something far darker, was pulling him toward her. His hand shook violently as he raised the scalpel once more. The procedure was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to bring closure. But this was different. This wasn't medicine. It wasn't healing. This was a sacrifice. A deal with something ancient and cruel. The room seemed to warp around him. The walls stretched and shrank, the floor buckled beneath his feet. He could hear the whispers of the other patients now, their voices rising in a chorus of longing and despair. They were all there, gathered in the shadows, waiting for him to make the final incision. Dr. Morrow's mind was no longer his own. The scalpel was no longer a tool of healing, it was an instrument of damnation. And so, without a word, he raised the blade and cut. The moment the scalpel touched the woman's chest, everything went silent. The air grew still, and the shadows seemed to recede into the corners of the room. The woman's body twitched once, then grew limp in his hands. He looked down at her, his breath caught in his throat. For a brief moment, he thought he had killed her, truly killed her. But when he looked again, she was no longer a woman. She was something else. The darkness inside her chest had spilled out, a viscous blackness that pooled at her feet like oil. It swirled around her body, rising higher and higher until it enveloped her completely. The air turned colder, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, swallowing the light. The room began to twist again. The walls groaned, as if the very building itself was being pulled apart. The lights flickered and buzzed, then went out entirely, plunging him into darkness. The only sound was the low, echoing hum of something ancient and malevolent. Then, a voice, a whisper, barely audible, sounded from the darkness. Dr. Morrow. It wasn't the woman's voice. It wasn't even a human voice. It was the voice of something far older, far more terrifying. And in that moment, Dr. Morrow knew he had made a terrible mistake. The scalpel slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor with a dull thud. His knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of his actions. The darkness around him seemed to pulse, as if it was alive, closing in on him. He had opened the door to something he couldn't control. And now, there was no way out. Story 4. Natalie had always loved her bed. It was an old mattress, lumpy, sagging in places, but it had been hers for as long as she could remember. The worn sheets, the familiar smell of lavender, the quiet hum of the apartment building settling in the night, it was all part of the comforting routine. Until tonight. As she lay in bed, trying to fall asleep after another long day at the office, she noticed something strange. It wasn't anything glaring, no sudden shift or dramatic movement, just a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the air. A slight shift in the way the mattress felt beneath her. At first, she brushed it off, blaming her exhaustion, but as she lay there, wide-eyed in the dim light, the sensation grew. It felt like the mattress was breathing. It wasn't loud, not like the whooshing sound of a person breathing deeply, but a gentle, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that seemed to pulse beneath her. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the creaks and groans of the bed settling into the night. But the sound, the sensation, it didn't feel like anything she had ever experienced before. The bed wasn't just creaking under her, it was shifting in sync with her own breathing. A slow rise, followed by a gentle fall. And then it happened again. She could feel it, an unmistakable rise of the mattress beneath her, like it was pulling in air, and then releasing it just as slowly. Natalie's heart began to race. She held her breath, listening. Was it possible? Could her bed really be alive? But no, this was ridiculous. She was tired. She was stressed. It was just her mind playing tricks on her. Right? But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And as she pulled the covers tighter around her, trying to drown out the strange sensations, it became clear her bed was breathing. The next morning, Nellie woke to the same feeling, the lingering sensation of a slow, rhythmic rise and fall beneath her. It wasn't just the bed, she realized. It was the room itself, as if the entire space was holding its breath, waiting for something. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it all. Maybe it had been the exhaustion, the stress of her recent breakup, or the long hours she had been putting into her job. But as she went about her day, trying to shake the unease, she couldn't get rid of the sensation. Her apartment felt off. There was a heaviness in the air, a sort of tension that hadn't been there before. That night, she made a conscious effort to stay awake, determined to disprove the strange feelings she had experienced the night before. She laid still in the dark, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts. Hours passed, and the darkness of the night grew thicker. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. There was a strange stillness that seemed to settle over everything. She heard the occasional creak of the building's aging pipes, the distant hum of a refrigerator cycling on, but nothing more. No voices. No footsteps. Just when she thought she had imagined everything, the bed began again. At first, she didn't want to believe it. But there it was, a slow, steady breath beneath her. It felt like something inside the mattress was pulling air in, deep and deliberate, and then releasing it with an unsettling slowness. It was too calculated, too rhythmic to be a coincidence. Her body went rigid, and her heart began to pound in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying it would stop. But it didn't. It kept going, that slow, measured inhale, followed by a long exhale. The mattress seemed to conform to her body in ways it never had before, hugging her sides more tightly, shifting under her like it was alive. The longer she lay there, the more she started to feel trapped. The bed, the room, the air itself, they all seemed to close in on her, drawing her into something she couldn't escape. The next day, she couldn't stop thinking about the bed. The sensation was still there, still fresh in her mind, and it plagued her throughout the day. She tried to rationalize it, tried to push the fear away, but the more she thought about it, the more the memory of the night's events seemed to grow, until it felt like a reality she couldn't ignore. At work, she found herself zoning out, staring at her computer screen without really seeing it. The eerie memory of the mattress breathing became an obsession, consuming her every waking moment. She had to figure out what was happening to get to the bottom of this strange, inexplicable occurrence. When the workday ended, she made her way to the local bookstore, hoping to find some answers. She scanned the aisles, searching for books on paranormal phenomena, strange occurrences, anything that might explain what she had been feeling. As she walked through the narrow aisles, a small, tattered book caught her eye. The cover was old and faded, the title barely visible, The Breathing House, Secrets of the Supernatural. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The weight of the book felt strange in her hands, as if it had been waiting for her. The page she turned to was worn, the edges crinkled as if it had been read and reread countless times. She began to skim through it, and a chill ran down her spine as she read the following passage. There are places, objects, and even people who have been touched by something ancient, something that transcends time and life itself. These places breathe. They inhale the souls of those who pass through them, exhaling their essence into the air. The most common manifestations of this are in beds, chairs, and rooms that harbor the restless spirits of the departed. Some are harmless, but others hunger for more than just their last breath. Natalie's fingers trembled as she read the words, her mind racing. She wasn't imagining it. The bed, the mattress, it wasn't just an object. It was something else. She had to know more. Natalie spent the next few days haunted by the thought of her bed. She couldn't stop thinking about the book she had found at the bookstore, The Breathing House. The words echoed in her mind as she went through her daily routine, becoming more and more unsettling with each passing hour. The idea that her mattress might be connected to something ancient, something supernatural, gnawed at her from the inside out. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe the book was just a collection of urban legends and paranormal fantasies. Maybe she was just tired, and her mind was playing tricks on her. But the memory of the bed's rhythmic breathing, the way it seemed to shift and change under her, would not leave her. Every night, as the darkness settled in, it became harder to shake the feeling that something was lurking in the corners of her room, waiting. The next evening, she came home exhausted after another grueling day at work. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but sleep seemed like an impossible escape. The bed, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had to face it. With a deep breath, she walked into her bedroom and stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the lumpy mattress that had become the epicenter of her fears. The air in the room felt heavier tonight, thick with the kind of silence that presses in on you from all sides. Natalie hesitated, but then, almost involuntarily, she lay down. As she settled onto the bed, she closed her eyes and held her breath, straining to listen. The silence stretched, making the sound of her own heartbeat seem deafening. For a long moment, nothing happened. The bed remained still, motionless beneath her. And then it came. The unmistakable rise and fall. The slow, deliberate exhalation of air. It was there, just as before, as if the mattress was inhaling. Natalie could feel the weight of it pressing into her. Her heart began to race as the mattress exhaled, an odd, suffocating sensation. Was she really experiencing this, or was her mind beginning to unravel? Suddenly, the room felt colder, the darkness deepening around her. She could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint sound of traffic from the street below, but there was something else now, something that vibrated in the air, something that seemed to be alive. The mattress shifted beneath her, not in a subtle way, but in a manner that felt deliberate, as though something was trying to reach out and touch her. She could feel the fabric of the sheets pulling taut, like fingers stretching from beneath the surface. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a strange sensation. It was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. As the mattress continued to breathe beneath her, Natalie couldn't stay still. She tried to sit up, but the sensation held her down, as if the bed itself was pulling her into its grasp. She pressed her palms into the mattress, trying to push herself free, but the bed felt heavier now, as though it was fighting back. And then, from deep within the bed, she heard it. A whisper. It was so faint, so soft that at first she thought it was just her imagination. But then it came again, louder this time, and Natalie's blood ran cold. "Help me." Her breath hitched, and her body tensed. She turned her head frantically, searching the room for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. The door was shut, the windows locked, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to remain still. The voice came again, this time closer, more insistent. Help me, please." It was coming from the bed. The very mattress she lay upon was speaking to her. The words were muffled, as though they were being spoken through layers of cloth and fabric, but they were unmistakable. Natalie's hands flew to her ears, as if she could block out the sound. But it didn't work. The voice was in her head, crawling into her mind like a parasite, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. "Who are you?" she gasped, her voice trembling. There was a long pause, as if the bed itself was thinking about the question. Then, in a voice that sounded more like a sigh than a whisper, it answered, "I'm the last, the one you forgot." Her heart pounded in her chest. What did that mean? Who was this? And why was it speaking to her? The mattress began to breathe more quickly now, the rise and fall becoming frantic, as if something deep within it was struggling to escape. The air grew thick with the smell of old dust and something else, something metallic. Blood? She couldn't tell. Her head spun, her thoughts racing. Was this real? Was she losing her mind? Or was there truly something in the bed, something trapped beneath its layers, waiting for her to help it? Natalie bolted upright in bed, gasping for air. Her pulse hammered in her ears, her throat tight with panic. The room was silent now, the oppressive heaviness replaced by an eerie stillness. She wiped the sweat from her brow and swung her legs off the bed, her feet meeting the cold floor. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of here, away from the bed, away from whatever was happening to her. But when she stood, she realized something strange. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Instead, they hovered just inches above it, like the ground had shifted beneath her. She looked down, and to her horror, she saw the bed, no, the mattress, pulling her back toward it. The fabric was stretching, writhing beneath her, as if it had a life of its own. The sheets tangled around her legs, pulling tighter and tighter. She screamed, her voice caught in her throat as she struggled to break free. The mattress was no longer simply breathing. It was alive, pulling her back, wrapping around her like an insidious creature. In a panic, she yanked at the bedspread, trying to tear herself free, but it was futile. The sheets tightened around her, a suffocating embrace, and the bed seemed to inhale again, drawing her back into its depths. "Help me," the voice whispered once more, and this time it sounded like a plea, desperate and raw. "I need you. You are the last." Natalie's mind raced as she realized the truth. Whatever was trapped inside the bed, it wasn't just a spirit or a ghost. It was something far worse. Something that had been waiting for her. And it wasn't going to let her go. Natalie couldn't breathe. Her body jerked violently against the bed's tightening grip, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. She yanked her legs again, this time harder, but the sheets felt like iron bands around her ankles, refusing to let her go. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and trembling. "Let me go." But the bed did not respond. It merely continued its slow, deliberate movements, rising and falling like some ancient creature inhaling deeply from within the earth. The smell of mildew and dust overwhelmed her, mixing with something else, a rancid, decayed scent that made her stomach churn. Suddenly, the pull stopped. The sheets fell loose from her limbs, and the air felt lighter again, though still thick with tension. She dared not move. Something deep inside her told her that whatever this was, it wasn't finished. The room was completely still, the kind of stillness that pressed against her chest. The whispering voice had fallen silent too, and that silence terrified her more than the sound ever could. It was as though the bed was waiting for something. Waiting for her. Natalie scrambled away from it, her breath erratic, her mind reeling. She tried to make sense of it. Was she losing her grip on reality? Was this some kind of nightmare she couldn't wake up from? She pinched herself again, harder this time, hoping to snap out of it. But it didn't help. Her skin still burned from the phantom touch of the sheets, the cold sweat still clinging to her skin. As she stood there, trembling and staring at the bed, a thought occurred to her, a horrifying realization. The bed wasn't just breathing. It was alive. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the mind. Something was inside it, something that had been waiting, something that now recognized her. In the silence, she heard a faint rustling sound. The sheets seemed to shift on their own, the fabric swaying, as though something was moving beneath it. It was then that the whispers returned. "I'm trapped." The voice was softer now, almost pleading, filled with sorrow. "I need you. You are the only one who can help me." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her chest. She staggered backward, her back pressing against the wall as she tried to steady herself. Her hands gripped the sides of her head, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, of fear, of desperation, of something else. Something pulling at the edges of her sanity. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her breathing, the rhythmic pulse of her heart beating louder and louder in her ears. Then, in the darkness, came the reply, faint, yet unmistakable. "I was once like you. A sleeper. A dreamer." A shiver crawled down Natalie's spine. She didn't understand. What did it mean? Who was this thing? And then the bed, the mattress, breathed once more. Not like before, a slow, rhythmic pull, but something more urgent, more desperate. The air in the room felt suffocating again, the temperature dropping. Her breath turned to mist as she watched in terror. The bed was calling to her. The voice, the whisper, it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence. Natalie couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something magnetic about the mattress now, something that seemed to pull her in, beckon her to approach. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to escape, but her body refused to obey. It was as though she were trapped within an invisible web, drawn closer with each heartbeat. With a shuddering breath, she took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath her, and the bed, no, the thing beneath it, seemed to sigh in relief. It was waiting. The bed was waiting for her to make the next move. As she approached, a chill crawled down her spine. The sheets, worn, threadbare, looked like they had aged centuries in mere hours. The fabric rippled unnaturally, twitching and shifting like something was trying to break free. She wanted to run, but the need to know, to understand what was happening, rooted her to the spot. "Come closer," the voice whispered. "You need to see." The words, soft and seductive, wrapped around her like a suffocating fog. She didn't understand what she was hearing, but she knew one thing: whatever was inside this bed was desperate for something. And it wasn't going to let her go until it got it. Her hands trembled as she reached out, fingers grazing the edge of the mattress. The moment her skin touched the fabric, the room seemed to shift. The walls warped, the air grew heavier, and the whispers intensified, their words no longer faint but overwhelming. "You'll understand," it cooed. "You'll see." Before she could pull her hand away, the sheets flared to life. The bed seemed to inhale deeply, dragging her closer, closer, until her entire body was once again hovering above it, as if the world had flipped upside down. The mattress undulated beneath her, its rhythm more erratic now, almost frantic. "No!" she cried, panicking, trying to break free. But it was too late. The bed had claimed her. She felt it, the suffocating pressure, as though her body were being swallowed by the fabric itself. And then, just as quickly, everything stopped. The movement, the weight, the suffocating presence, it all halted. For a brief moment, Nellie thought it was over, that the nightmare had ended. But then the room went dark. When Nellie opened her eyes, she wasn't in her bedroom anymore. She was lying on a slab, cold and unyielding, surrounded by darkness. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating. Her eyes strained to make sense of her surroundings, but the shadows were too deep, the shapes too distorted to comprehend. She could hear the sound of something moving. Soft, deliberate movements, like a predator stalking its prey. And then the whispers came again, low and guttural, as if they were coming from far away and yet somehow inside her own head. "You are here," it said. "You are the last." Panic surged through Natalie's chest, and she tried to sit up. But the darkness, it pressed against her, pulling her down. There was a weight to it, a suffocating force that threatened to crush her spirit. "This is where I was born," the voice continued, its tone mournful now. "This is where I've always lived." She understood then. The bed, the mattress, had been alive. But it was not a simple thing, not a ghost or a mere haunted object. It was something older, something tied to the very fabric of the house itself. A presence that had been trapped in the walls, in the foundation, and it had found a way to reach out, to pull her in. The truth struck her with a force that nearly knocked her breath away. She wasn't just a visitor to this place. She was part of it. She was the last one it had waited for. "I am your mother," the voice whispered. "And you are my child." Her world tilted, and for a moment, she didn't know if she was dreaming, if she was awake, or if this was a nightmare from which she could never escape. Natalie's chest tightened as she felt the weight of the darkness pressing against her, suffocating her thoughts. The words the entity spoke reverberated in her mind, bouncing like endless echoes, each one louder and clearer than the last. "I am your mother." The phrase held a terrible finality to it. She had no time to question it, no time to wonder how such a thing could be possible. The truth was a blade that cut straight to her core. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to fully understand it. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, but no matter how hard she tried to fight it, Her body remained paralyzed. The suffocating sensation seemed to crawl under her skin, burrowing deep inside her. Her body had stopped responding to her commands, and as the oppressive force surrounding her grew heavier, the air seemed to thin, choking her even further. "You've always known me." The voice was soft now, almost a lullaby, but there was nothing comforting about it. "I've always been here." Natalie's mind reeled. She could see flashes, faint images of her childhood, fragmented memories, moments she thought she had long forgotten. Her mother, smiling, brushing her hair, reading to her at night. But these memories weren't of warmth or love. They were strange, twisted reflections, as though they had been altered somehow, manipulated by a dark force. No, it couldn't be true. Her mother, her real mother, was dead. She had been gone for years, the pain of that loss still raw within her heart. But this thing, whatever it was, had woven itself into the very fabric of her past, had twisted those memories into something grotesque. And now, it was calling her home. The darkness seemed to move closer, wrapping itself around her as if it were alive and hungry. She couldn't move. She couldn't escape. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her body a shell, helpless against the thing that had her in its grasp. "Come to me, child," the voice crooned. "Come to me and rest." It sounded so sweet, so tender. And yet, there was a finality in it, a command that Natalie could no longer ignore. The bed, the mattress, it was pulling her back to it, back into its grasp. But this time, it wasn't just the physical sensation of being drawn toward it, it was the pull of something darker, something ancient, something she could never escape. Her feet felt like lead as she staggered to her feet. The air around her was thick and dark, like ink spilling over the edges of her reality. Every step she took seemed to drag her deeper into the unseen, as though the floor beneath her was softening into something else. Natalie's hands shook uncontrollably as she reached out, as if drawn by an invisible thread. She didn't want to do it. She wanted to scream, to fight, to break free, but there was something inside her, a whispering urge, compelling her forward, drawing her to the bed, to the thing she now understood was her true origin. "I am your mother." The voice now was an impenetrable force. It was part of her, and yet it wasn't. It was the space between the breaths, the space between the waking and the sleeping, the space between the living and the dead. Her feet hit the edge of the bed, the breath of the mattress warm and moist under her skin. She wanted to pull away, but her body refused. There was no strength left in her, no will to resist. The bed was no longer a place of rest. It had become the womb that birthed her, a cursed, living thing that needed her to return, to give birth to the next cycle of its insatiable hunger. The sheets, now frayed and blackened with age, seemed to writhe like serpents beneath her touch. She could feel something moving inside them, something that no longer resembled the soft fabric she had once known. It was more like a pulse, alive, insistent, crawling under her skin. And then, with a sudden rush of air, the room around her shifted. Natalie gasped as the world around her twisted, like watching a film being rewound and played in reverse. The walls bent inward, the ceiling looming low as though it wanted to collapse. The shadows danced across the room, forming shapes, faces. Her mind screamed as memories flashed like strobe lights, her mother, her family, her childhood, all of them altered, shaped by something darker. The bed creaked beneath her, and she realized, with a sinking heart that she was no longer alone. Something else was in the room with her. Suddenly, a burst of white light filled the room, so blinding that Natalie staggered backward, shielding her eyes. But in that light, she saw her. Her mother. Not the woman who had died years ago, but this version of her, a gaunt, hollowed-out version of the woman Natalie had known. Her eyes were black voids, her skin stretched tight over bone. She reached out to Natalie, her bony hand beckoning her closer, her lips forming words without sound. "Come to me, my child," the figure said, the voice distorted, as if it were being sucked into a vacuum. "Come home." Tears blurred Natalie's vision as she shook her head violently, refusing to believe this nightmare. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. This was wrong. All of it. This was not her mother. This was something else, something far more sinister. But the bed still breathed. The whispering, the sounds, the pull, it was all too much. She wanted to run. She needed to run. But as she turned to flee, she felt it. The breath. That heavy, oppressive presence. The bed's voice, her mother's voice, wrapped around her like a vice. "You can't escape me," it whispered. "You belong to me now." In a moment of clarity, Natalie understood the truth. This wasn't just a haunted bed, it was a trap. The mattress had swallowed her life, her memories, and now it sought to take her soul. She wasn't its first victim, and she wouldn't be the last. It was an endless cycle, one soul after another, trapped in the suffocating womb of this cursed bed. And yet, even in the face of this revelation, a part of Natalie still fought. She could feel it, that last glimmer of resistance within her. She could choose. With every ounce of strength she had left, Natalie wrenched herself away from the bed's embrace. She ran, pushed past the darkness, past the suffocating presence. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she ran, and the bed's breath became a distant echo behind her. As she burst through the door and into the hallway, the world around her began to warp, the shadows clinging to her skin. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. Natalie didn't stop running. She fled through the house, through the endless corridors that twisted like a maze. The air was thick, and she could still feel the presence of the bed chasing her, pulling her toward the dark depths. But then, as she reached the front door, something strange happened. The pressure lifted. The weight in her chest evaporated, as though a great force had been lifted. The world seemed to breathe with her once more. She opened the door. It was dawn. The first light of morning spilled into the room, golden and warm. Her body trembled, exhausted, but she was free. Or so she thought. As Natalie stepped outside, she turned to look at the house one last time. The windows were dark, the door ajar. And from inside the house, she could hear it. The faint, rhythmic sound of breathing. She ran, not looking back. Story 5. It was nearly midnight when Jacob Simmons found himself driving through a stretch of road he'd never seen before. The last few hours had been a blur, just the dull, monotonous thrum of his car's engine and the occasional flicker of his headlights illuminating the endless, empty highway. He had been on the road for far too long, heading back from a business trip upstate. His eyes were heavy, his body worn out, but there was something about this particular stretch of road that felt wrong. The trees lining the sides of the road were tall and dark, their branches twisting in ways that made Jacob uneasy, as though they were reaching out to grab him. The air was thick, not humid but suffocating, and the only sound, apart from the hum of his car, was the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. It was a calm night, too calm, like the world was holding its breath. Jacob glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 12:23 a.m. He had passed through a small town an hour ago, and there hadn't been a sign of civilization for miles. At this hour, it was just him and the road, the perfect recipe for falling asleep at the wheel. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he fought the fatigue creeping up on him. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen another car. The road stretched on endlessly, the lanes curving into what seemed like an infinite horizon, but no turns, no exits. Just a flat, unbroken ribbon of asphalt. As he drove, the road seemed to warp in his peripheral vision, the trees bending at unnatural angles, their shadows stretching across the road in ways that made him question whether his tired mind was playing tricks on him. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind him, just an endless stretch of empty road. Yet, a strange sensation lingered, something lurking just beyond his line of sight. It was at 12:43 a.m. when Jacob noticed something odd. He had just passed a worn-down gas station on his left, the flickering neon lights casting an eerie glow across the dark landscape. He had seen it earlier, but now, as he drove past it again, he realized something was terribly wrong. His heart skipped a beat as he slammed on the brakes. The gas station. He was sure of it. It had been miles behind him, but here it was again, right in front of him. He had passed the same stretch of road, yet it appeared again, as if the miles he had driven had vanished, replaced by the same scenery. He rubbed his eyes, thinking perhaps he was hallucinating. The exhaustion was getting to him, he figured. But as he looked back at the gas station, the realization hit him like a brick wall. There was no mistaking it. It was the same gas station, the same broken sign, the same faded advertisements for cheap cigarettes. The dread pooled in his stomach. He turned his car around and drove back toward the station, his heart racing. He didn't know what he expected to find, but as he passed the gas station once again, it was as though he had never left. The same broken-down pumps, the same flickering neon, all of it mocking him. He accelerated, now desperate to escape this nightmare. He drove for what seemed like hours, but no matter how far he went, the road remained the same. The trees, the shadows, the empty highway, it never changed. The endless stretch of black pavement stretched out before him, a never-ending loop he couldn't break free from. Jacob slammed his fist against the steering wheel, his frustration boiling over. "This isn't real," he muttered to himself. "It can't be real." He had to be imagining things. But the cold, creeping sense of dread gnawed at him. Something was terribly wrong. At 1:10 a.m., the darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. Jacob's eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, as though expecting something to appear. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever. The exhaustion had become unbearable, the fatigue pressing down on his mind like a vice. His eyes were growing heavy, his vision blurring. Maybe if he just pulled over, he could rest for a few minutes. Just a few minutes to clear his head. But when he glanced back at the mirror, he saw something that froze his blood. A figure. A shadow, tall and thin, standing in the middle of the road. It was no more than a silhouette, but even in the darkness, he could make out the outline of a person. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring at him. "Get off the road," he yelled, as if the figure could hear him. He slammed on the brakes and veered to the side of the road, barely missing the shadow. The car screeched to a halt, and Jacob's breath came in short, panicked gasps. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The road was empty. The figure was gone. But something had changed. His entire body felt heavy, the air thick with a suffocating sense of foreboding. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, just to make sure he hadn't imagined it. Nothing. But as he continued to stare, the mirror fogged over. Then, through the condensation, he saw something, a face, staring back at him. The face was distorted, gaunt, its eyes wide with terror. Its mouth was frozen in a scream, yet no sound reached him. The face was impossibly close, as though it had pressed its face up against the mirror. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It was a face he didn't recognize, but it felt like it was looking right into his soul. The nightmare was growing, consuming him piece by piece. Jacob's pulse thudded in his ears as he sped down the road, desperate to escape whatever force was trapping him. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, sweat pouring down his face. He was no longer sure of where he was, or how long he had been driving. The headlights ahead illuminated only more darkness. Every bend in the road looked identical to the last, every tree a twisted, gnarled version of the ones before it. The world had become a blur, a loop he couldn't break free from. Suddenly, he felt it. A pressure in the car, something shifting beside him, in the passenger seat. He glanced quickly, but the seat was empty. His heart skipped a beat as the sensation intensified. It felt like someone was sitting there, breathing beside him. Jacob's gaze darted to the rearview mirror again. But there was nothing. Nothing but the thick darkness pressing against the glass. He exhaled shakily, feeling the weight of the car's isolation. "Just get out of here," he whispered to himself. "Get out of this damn loop." But as he drove, the landscape began to change subtly. The trees no longer looked like trees. The road was no longer just a road. He was no longer alone. He could feel the presence next to him, in the seat beside him. The air became thick, suffocating with an oppressive force that made him want to scream. And then, in the distance, he saw it. The gas station. Again. The moment Jacob's headlights illuminated the gas station once again, his chest tightened. The sense of déjà vu, of something deeply wrong, washed over him like a cold wave. He had seen this place before, too many times now. Every time he thought he had passed it, it reappeared, mocking him. It was as if the road itself was bending to some cruel whim, twisting around itself in a loop that he couldn't escape. He could feel the unease crawling up his spine. Sweat dripped down his face despite the chill in the air. The road ahead stretched endlessly, the gas station a flickering, uninviting beacon in the dark. His heart hammered in his chest, and his hands shook on the steering wheel. "I need to get out of here," he muttered, though the words felt hollow. With a deep breath, Jacob slammed his foot on the accelerator. The engine roared, the car jolting forward, but even with the speed, it felt as though the gas station stayed the same distance ahead. No matter how hard he tried, the gas station was always there, its flickering lights casting long, unnatural shadows. He gripped the wheel tighter, trying to will himself to focus. Come on, think. Think. He had to break free. He had to keep moving. But no matter how far he drove, the station never seemed to move out of sight. It was as if the world had folded in on itself, trapping him within an endless, suffocating loop. As his mind began to reel, the faintest sound reached his ears. It was low, almost imperceptible, but it carried with it a sense of dread. A whisper, too faint to understand, but unmistakably there. Jacob froze, eyes wide, scanning the darkness outside the car. He looked to his rearview mirror. The air seemed thicker now, the world beyond the glass taking on an unreal, oppressive quality. Then he saw it. The figure, standing just beside the gas station. Its shape was elongated and unnatural, its silhouette moving slowly but steadily toward him. Jacob's breath hitched. He had seen this figure before, hadn't he? It was the same shadow he had glimpsed earlier. But now it was different, closer, somehow more solid. And as the figure drew nearer, the whispering grew louder. Jacob's hand jerked to the steering wheel, his foot slamming down on the gas pedal. The engine growled in response, but despite the speed, it felt as though the car was barely moving. The world outside the windows was pressing in, suffocating him, and the figure in the distance was coming closer. He glanced back at the rearview mirror again, and that's when he heard it, a voice, low and urgent, coming from the passenger seat. At first, it was just a murmur, too quiet to make out. But then it became clearer. Turn back, you shouldn't have gone this way. His heart lurched. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it, that it was his mind playing tricks on him due to the exhaustion. But then the voice came again, louder, sharper. Stop. Don't go any further. The words were followed by a chilling silence, the kind that settled in the car like an iron weight. Jacob's pulse quickened. He looked frantically to the passenger seat, half expecting someone to be sitting there, but the seat was empty. It remained empty. But the voice didn't stop. It continued, growing in intensity, echoing in his mind, drowning out everything else. Turn back, or you will never escape. He was losing his mind, that much was clear. The voice, the figure, it was all too much to bear. But there was one thing Jacob knew for sure, the road wasn't real. It couldn't be. The figures, the whispering, the gas station that wouldn't leave, it was all part of some cruel trick. A nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. By the time Jacob realized how much time had passed, his eyes were too tired to focus properly. He glanced at the clock. 1:50 a.m. But the road hadn't changed. It was still the same, stretching endlessly in both directions, the gas station always just behind him. He couldn't remember when the last turn had been. Was there a turn? Was there an exit? No, he had been on this road for hours now, and it was all starting to blend together. The static hum of the radio in the car seemed to mock him. He reached over and turned it off, the silence returning, thick and unnerving. But then, he thought he heard something else, something faint, but unmistakable. A soft tapping, rhythmic, almost like a knock. At first, it seemed to come from outside the car, but then it shifted to the passenger seat again, tapping lightly on the window. Jacob's pulse spiked. His gaze flicked over to the window. There was no one there, but the tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. He turned the volume dial on the car stereo, hoping to drown it out, but it did nothing. The sound seemed to press against the walls of the car. His skin prickled, sweat running down his neck. The tapping grew more frantic, more desperate. "Stop it!" Jacob shouted, turning the wheel sharply. But the car remained in its endless loop, moving forward but never making progress. The road stretched on, unchanging. His heart hammered in his chest. The tapping didn't stop. It was as if something, or someone, was on the other side of the glass, just waiting to get in. Jacob slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop. His eyes scanned the darkness outside the windows, his hands trembling. The gas station was behind him again, just as it had been before. The tapping ceased. But the silence was worse. His mind was breaking. Jacob knew it. He could feel it in every fiber of his being, the slow unraveling of his sanity. It felt like the world around him was slipping through his fingers, like he was fading from it. He glanced once more into the rearview mirror. The gas station was gone. But the figure, now closer than ever before, stood at the edge of the road. This time, Jacob could make out more details. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a man, tall, gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at Jacob. The man stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as the figure neared. Something was wrong with its movements. Its legs moved stiffly, jerking unnaturally with every step. Suddenly, the road ahead split, branching into two directions. One path stretched straight, disappearing into the fog. The other bent sharply to the left, vanishing behind a curve. Jacob had only moments to decide. The figure stopped, its eyes locked on him through the rearview mirror. It didn't speak, but Jacob knew what it wanted him to do. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, sweat pouring down his face. He had to make a choice. He had to escape, if it was even possible to escape this nightmare. With a final breath, he turned the wheel. Jacob's hands shook violently as he turned the steering wheel, guiding the car onto the left path. The moment the tires hit the fog, the world outside the windshield became a blurry, indistinct smear of shadows and light. The sharp contrast of the road's edge, the invisible boundary between the familiar and the unknown, seemed to stretch endlessly. The engine hummed quietly beneath him, but it sounded wrong, too quiet, too hollow. He tried to push the thought from his mind. Just keep driving, he told himself. Just keep going. But the fog thickened with each passing second, swirling around the car like a living thing, choking out everything in its path. The eerie stillness was suffocating, amplifying the distant hum of the engine until it sounded like a living creature, like something was breathing beneath the hood. His breath quickened, matching the beat of his heart. The road twisted with maddening precision, impossible to follow. He glanced at the rearview mirror, but it was like looking into an abyss. There was nothing there, no figure, no sign of the gas station. Just a wall of thick, oppressive fog. Yet, Jacob could still feel it, the oppressive weight of eyes on him. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his fingers slick on the wheel, and squinted into the mist. "What is happening to me?" he whispered. "What am I driving into?" The fog felt alive, creeping up his neck, slithering into his lungs with each breath he took. It was more than just a weather phenomenon. It was as if the road itself was pushing back, trying to smother him. A strange noise cut through the fog. A faint tapping again. This time, it didn't come from the window. It was in the car, from the back seat. It was a rhythmic tapping, like a hand drumming on the seat. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The tapping was too real. Too close. He whipped his head around, but the back seat was empty. Still, the tapping continued. Louder. More insistent. Tap. 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 Stop it. Just stop. Jacob screamed, his voice cracking. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator, hoping the speed would somehow free him from whatever nightmare had latched onto him. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, as if mocking him with its impossible length. Jacob's grip tightened on the wheel as his mind raced. The tapping grew louder, the sound now like a drum beating in his skull. His pulse quickened with every passing second, every corner of the fog swirling around him, suffocating him further. His head spun as memories flashed through his mind, blurry but painful. There was something wrong with this road. It wasn't the first time Jacob had been on it, was it? No. He remembered it now. The first time he had driven this stretch, was it yesterday? A week ago? Time had no meaning anymore, and he wasn't sure when the hours had blurred into a chaotic, nightmare-ridden haze. The fog outside thickened, and the road seemed to bend in unnatural angles, stretching on and on. The edges of the world started to bleed into one another, no clear line of distinction between the road, the sky, and the thick, choking mist. Focus, Jacob. Focus, he whispered, trying to anchor himself. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. But the more he tried to remember, the more distant the truth became. He had driven this road before, hadn't he? He was sure of it. He had come down this path. He had seen the gas station, the figure, the unending loop. A sudden, sharp pain in his head made him gasp. The tapping grew louder, impossibly louder, now like a frenzied pounding. It was coming from behind him, but it felt as if it was inside his own skull. He swerved, the tires screeching as they fought against the wet pavement, but it didn't matter. The road was infinite. The fog thickened. Nothing changed. Make it stop. Please. Jacob begged, his voice breaking. The tapping was deafening now. He could feel it in his chest, in his bones. In the rearview mirror, the fog parted for a split second. For just a moment, Jacob could see something. Someone. A pale figure, barefoot, hunched, its face obscured by its long, tangled hair. A shadow in the fog. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It was her, the woman who had been standing outside the gas station earlier. He hadn't imagined it. She was real. And she was following him. Her face, pale and hollow, twisted in agony, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her lips moved, though there were no words. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It was then that Jacob realized the road hadn't changed. It hadn't looped. He hadn't been stuck in time. The road was alive. The fog grew colder, pressing in against the car's windows like an unseen hand trying to claw its way inside. The temperature in the car dropped, the breath on Jacob's skin turning to vapor with every exhale. His chest felt tight, his lungs working overtime as he tried to breathe through the suffocating cold. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong to him. "What do you want from me?" The figure in the rearview mirror didn't respond. But Jacob could feel her presence, so much stronger now, pressing against him like a weight, suffocating him. Her pale, outstretched hands seemed to reach for him through the glass, her fingers brushing against the fog. He couldn't shake the feeling that if he let his guard down for even a second, she would be inside the car, sitting next to him. The tapping stopped, but in its place came a new sound. A soft, rhythmic thudding. Like something, or someone, was pounding from inside the walls of the car. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror again. The figure was gone. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the oppressive fog, the endless road, and the eerie hum of the engine. Then, from somewhere deep within the fog, he saw it, a flash of light. A distant glow, like headlights, but they were coming from the wrong direction. Jacob's heart leapt into his throat. He slammed on the brakes. But the car didn't stop. It kept moving forward, faster, the lights growing brighter. The road stretched on, never ending. The headlights grew larger, closer. They were coming for him, he realized with growing dread. Coming straight at him. Not again. Jacob screamed, his voice raw with terror. He didn't remember when it started, but the road ahead of him had become something else, something more, something darker. The headlights were all around him now, circling him like predators. He was surrounded. There was no escape. Jacob pressed his foot to the gas, but the car no longer responded. It was as if the engine had died, leaving him trapped in the mist, alone with whatever had been following him. He tried to turn the wheel, but it was too late. The headlights were too close now. Too bright. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. And then, with an agonizing thud, the car lurched forward, into the fog. Into the abyss. And the last thing Jacob saw, before everything went black, was the face of a woman. Her hollow eyes staring back at him, wide with something more than just madness. It was fear. Jacob's eyes snapped open. His body jerked in panic, as though he had just been yanked from some dark abyss. The first thing he noticed was the absolute silence that enveloped him, no car engine, no tapping, no pounding of any kind. Just the soft rush of wind. His hands instinctively reached for the steering wheel, but it wasn't there. Panic set in as he realized he was no longer in his car. He wasn't in control of anything. The familiar feel of the road beneath him was gone, replaced by soft grass brushing against his legs. His heartbeat thrummed violently in his ears, drowning out the soft rustling of the trees nearby. "What?" Jacob gasped, his voice sounding foreign, a distant echo of his fear. He was lying on the side of the road, his body aching with a dull pain. The air was heavy, thick with fog, but the road itself had changed. No longer was it paved and carefully marked. Instead, it was a winding, rough path that seemed to stretch endlessly into the forest. There were no streetlights, no signs, no indication of where he had ended up. The trees surrounding him were tall and black, their branches casting long, crooked shadows in the dull light. Jacob pulled himself up with effort, his vision blurring as he attempted to steady himself. His clothes were wet with dew. He felt as though he had been lying there for hours or days, he couldn't tell. His skin was clammy and cold, but his mind was at a fever pitch. The memory of the headlights, of the fog, of the woman's face, all of it churned within him and insisted, growing knot of terror. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice hoarse and cracked. He scanned the landscape, but nothing looked familiar. The trees loomed menacingly, their branches weaving together in dark patterns. It was as if the forest itself was alive in a way that made Jacob's skin crawl. Then he heard it again, the soft, rhythmic tapping. His heart jumped in his chest. It came from somewhere behind him, just beyond the edge of the path. His muscles tensed, and every instinct screamed at him to run. But his feet remained frozen to the ground, as if the earth had somehow taken hold of him. Tap. 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 He spun around, but there was no one there. Just the endless, hollow sound of the trees whispering in the wind. Jacob's breath came in shallow gasps as he stumbled forward, his legs unsteady beneath him. Every step felt like a battle, his body heavy with the weight of the unknown. The fog twisted and coiled around him, like an entity with its own mind. The sounds of the forest, creaking branches, rustling leaves, seemed to be alive with whispering voices. They weren't real, of course. They couldn't be. He was alone here. Wasn't he? The road behind him, if it even was a road, was long gone, obscured by the thick mist. All that remained was the constant sound of tapping, steadily growing louder. It was as if the road itself was trying to pull him back. But Jacob couldn't go back, could he? He had to keep moving forward. He had to escape. He quickened his pace, each step feeling heavier, as though the earth itself was trying to drag him back to where it all began. Every time he thought he could see a glimpse of a road or a structure in the distance, the fog would blur it, swallowing it whole. The tapping was everywhere now, surrounding him. He could hear it, feel it, deep within his bones. It was an insistent rhythm, one that seemed to reach into the very core of his soul, dragging him deeper into a maddening frenzy. "Please," Jacob whispered, his voice shaking. "I need to know what's happening. I need to understand." And then, out of the fog, something materialized. At first, it was just a shape, a shadow in the distance. But as it grew closer, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The figure was unmistakable. It was the woman. She was standing in the middle of the path, her eyes wide open, unblinking, as though she could see everything and nothing at the same time. Her face was pale, too pale, her skin stretched tightly across her bones. Her lips barely moved, but Jacob could hear her voice in his head. "You never left, Jacob. You've always been here," she whispered, her words like a cold wind scraping across his mind. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread sweep over him, but he couldn't look away. It was like a gravitational pull, one that made his body tremble with the need to move closer. Her eyes, black as coal, stared directly into his, and suddenly he felt everything shifting inside of him. "WH, what do you mean?" he croaked, his voice trembling as he stepped forward. The ground seemed to give way beneath his feet, but still, he couldn't stop moving. "You never left this road," she whispered again, her voice so soft it sent chills crawling down his spine. It's all in your mind. All of it. Her words echoed in his ears, repeating, looping, like the road itself. And with them came the realization, crashing over him like a tidal wave. He had never left this road. Jacob felt his knees give out as the truth settled into his mind. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't some figment of his imagination. He wasn't caught in a loop of time. This was his punishment. The woman's figure loomed above him, growing in intensity. The fog thickened once more, pressing against his skin. He could feel the air becoming more oppressive, like it was choking him, pulling him deeper into the never-ending maze. No, no, no! Jacob screamed. His voice cracked, and panic gripped him in an iron vice. I want to leave. I can't stay here. Please, let me go. But the woman just stood there, her face a twisted, hollow mask of sorrow. She didn't speak again, but Jacob heard her words, the words that weren't hers, but were somehow his, repeating in his mind. You can't leave. Not anymore. The tapping had stopped. The air was still, too still, and Jacob couldn't tell if he was alive or dead, awake or dreaming. The road stretched before him, endless, inviting him into its jaws once again. His heart pounded in his chest as he forced himself to his feet, but there was nowhere to go. Every step forward took him deeper into the fog, deeper into the truth that he was trapped forever. Jacob stood frozen in place as the fog swirled around him, swallowing everything. His mind was reeling, but something inside him told him he had to keep moving. He had to. For his sanity. Please, let it end, Jacob whispered, his voice barely audible, as if the fog would swallow the words before they ever reached her. But she was still there, watching him with her cold, black eyes, offering nothing but silence. He turned away from her, his heart hammering in his chest. One step, then another. The road stretched on ahead, too long, too endless to ever escape. And yet, in the pit of his soul, Jacob knew the truth. He had been here before. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't even the second time. The path he walked, this loop, was his own personal hell, and it would never release him. The road was always here. And he would never leave it. He would never leave. Story 6. James Davidson had always believed his house to be a place of safety, of routine. He had spent the better part of 10 years in the old Victorian home on Oakwood Avenue. The house was a relic, a sprawling structure filled with creaky floors and the faint smell of dust that never seemed to leave. He had become accustomed to its quirks, its narrow hallways, its rooms that never quite seemed to align with the floor plans he had received when he purchased the house. But he had never questioned it. After all, there was a charm to its peculiarities. But that morning, as James wandered the halls, an unsettling silence filled the air. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantel, these familiar sounds had vanished. There was only a heavy stillness now, like the house itself was holding its breath. His footsteps echoed too loudly as he moved through the kitchen, past the dining room, and toward the hallway that led to the guest room. But something was off. Something wasn't right. James paused and blinked. The wall. There was a wall where there hadn't been one before. For a moment, he thought it might be a trick of the light. The angle at which he stood, the dimness of the hallway, all of it could have been playing tricks on him. But no! There was definitely a new wall. His heart began to race. The wall wasn't part of the house's original design. It wasn't on any blueprint, nor was it something he had noticed before. It stretched across the hallway, a stark, unbroken line that ended just where the guest room door used to be. He couldn't explain it, and his first instinct was to turn back. But instead, he found himself walking toward it. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the doorknob to the guest room. No, it wasn't the guest room anymore. It was the new wall, cold and smooth beneath his fingers. The realization hit him in a wave of confusion and dread. There had been no renovations, no construction done recently. So how did this wall just appear? Impossible, he muttered under his breath. But his own voice seemed to break the silence of the house in a way that made him feel even more uneasy. James stared at the wall, uncertain of what to do. He stepped back, then forward again, as if trying to convince himself that this wasn't real, that this wasn't happening. He had lived in this house for over a decade, and now, suddenly, there was a wall where there should not have been. It defied logic. It was an aberration. Taking a deep breath, he leaned closer to the wall, pressing his ear against the cold surface. It felt solid, but the air around it felt off, like something was breathing, slow, steady, almost imperceptible. His heart thudded in his chest, and for a fleeting moment, he considered turning away and pretending he hadn't seen this. It was easier, after all, to ignore things that didn't make sense. But something deep inside of him, urged him to investigate further. He reached up and tapped the wall with his knuckles. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of solid wood or drywall. It was hollow, unnervingly hollow. His fingers instinctively traced the outline of the wall, and for a moment, his hand lingered where the wall met the floor. The floor was slightly raised here, as if there was something underneath. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a hidden room, some old storage space he hadn't noticed. He tried to calm himself with that thought, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. There were no hidden rooms in this house. The floor plan was simple, straightforward. Nothing about this made sense. As if to confirm his suspicion, a strange creak came from behind the wall, followed by a faint scratching noise, like someone was moving inside. James felt his breath catch in his throat. No, that was impossible. The house was empty. He was alone. He had been alone all morning. Yet, there was no denying the sound, soft, persistent, unmistakable. It was as though the wall was alive. James stepped back, heart racing. He glanced around the hallway, but no one was there. He had to know what was on the other side of this wall. He couldn't explain it, but a nagging sense of urgency built in his chest. His curiosity had become an insatiable need. The first thing he did was find a tool. He grabbed a crowbar from the garage, his mind racing with ideas, none of which felt comforting. He returned to the wall, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on him. His fingers tightened around the crowbar, and with a deep breath, he set to work. He positioned the tool against the gap between the wall and the floor and gave it a hard pull. The sound of metal against drywall screeched through the house like a horrible, unearthly cry. He gritted his teeth, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of his neck as he worked, his body tense, every movement sharp with anxiety. After several minutes, a piece of the wall came free with a soft pop. James shoved the loose segment aside, revealing a dark, narrow gap. He peered inside. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the flashlight he had brought. His breath caught in his throat as he saw something glinting faintly in the shadows, an object, perhaps, or a reflection. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer. The wall had opened enough for him to squeeze through, and the curiosity gnawing at him overpowered the growing dread in his gut. His pulse thundered in his ears as he crawled through the hole. James squeezed through the narrow opening, his body contorting as he forced his way through the gap. The space beyond the wall felt strange, cool, stagnant air that hit him like an unseen hand. His heart raced in his chest as he emerged into what could only be described as an utterly alien space. The room was small, almost suffocatingly so, with high ceilings that gave off an eerie sense of confinement. The walls were not lined with wallpaper or paint, but something darker, something that made the light from his flashlight flicker. The walls seemed to ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by unseen movements. James blinked, unsure if he was imagining it. He swung the beam of the flashlight across the room. There were no windows, no furniture. It was just bare, uneven walls and a dusty floor that stretched out before him. The space felt wrong in a way he couldn't put into words, like it was a void, disconnected from the rest of the house. His breath came in shallow gasps as his eyes darted from corner to corner, searching for some sign of what was happening. Then, something caught his attention. At the farthest corner of the room, near the floor, was a strange indentation in the wall. It wasn't a natural crack or the kind of where you'd expect from age or decay. It was too deliberate. James stepped closer, his flashlight beam shaking in his hands as he approached the odd, rounded shape. The wall seemed almost alive in that corner. It was as if it was breathing, just like the wall he had pressed his ear to earlier. It expanded and contracted with the faintest movement, like it was absorbing the air around it. The air in the room was thick, too dense to be normal, and the faint sound of something scraping beneath the surface sent a cold chill creeping up his spine. James knelt beside the indentation, unable to look away. The sensation of being watched was growing stronger, pressing against him like an invisible force. He reached out, unable to stop himself. His fingers brushed the wall, and for a second, the scraping noise intensified, sharp, metallic, like claws against stone. James recoiled, his breath ragged in the heavy silence. He had been so focused on the indentation that he hadn't noticed something else. To his left, there was a narrow, almost hidden doorway, its edges frayed and faded like a memory he couldn't recall. His pulse quickened, a sense of something awful tugging at him from deep within. He stepped toward the door, drawn by some invisible force he couldn't explain. The air grew colder as he approached it, the temperature plummeting with each step. He reached out a hand and gripped the handle. It was warm, almost unnaturally so, as if someone had been holding it just moments ago. For a brief moment, he considered turning back. But his feet wouldn't listen. He had to know what was behind the door. He had to see. With a deep, shaky breath, James twisted the knob and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the empty space. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, and the air was thick with an oppressive, suffocating weight. His flashlight revealed nothing at first, just more darkness, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. As he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him with a violent crash. James spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs, but there was nothing. No wind. No open door. Panic began to swell in his chest. He tried to turn the knob again, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the room had swallowed it whole, sealing him inside. The flashlight trembled in his hand, casting erratic shadows across the walls. He turned back to face the space ahead of him. Something was there. It was hard to make out at first, but as the flashlight's beam danced across the room, it became clear. A figure stood at the far end, shrouded in shadow, its outline almost indistinct. James's breath caught in his throat as he instinctively took a step backward. The figure didn't move. It stood still, almost waiting. There was something chilling about it, the way it felt in the air. Something was terribly wrong about this place, but James couldn't tear himself away. The air in the room felt heavier now, dense with something he couldn't quite place. The figure in the darkness didn't move, didn't speak. But James could feel it. A presence, like a weight pressing down on him. It was as if the figure were aware of his every movement, as if it were watching him. And then, as though it were no longer enough to merely be a shape in the dark, it spoke. The voice was a low whisper, unintelligible at first, like a murmur in the distance. But then, clearer and louder, the words began to form, as if they were being drawn up from deep within the walls. You shouldn't be here. James's breath faltered. His legs felt weak beneath him, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. The whisper had no source, it was coming from everywhere. The walls. The ceiling. The floor. It was as though the room itself was alive, breathing the words into his mind. For a moment, he stood paralyzed, unsure of what to do. The presence was overwhelming, drowning him in its suffocating grip. The room seemed to shift around him, the shadows twisting in unnatural patterns. The figure hadn't moved, but its influence was suffocating. Who are you? James finally managed to force out, his voice a strained whisper in the oppressive silence. There was a long pause. The shadows seemed to lengthen, crawling across the floor toward him. I am nothing, the voice whispered. I am a space that should not exist. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This room, this place, shouldn't be here. It wasn't part of the house. It was a place between places, a gap in the fabric of reality itself. You've woken it, the voice continued, softer now, almost sad. And now, it will never let you leave. James stumbled backward, his heart racing, his head spinning with the impossible truth of what he had discovered. This place was not just a hidden room. It was something far worse, something far older. The walls breathed. The shadows moved. And it was alive in a way that defied explanation. And now, it was holding him here. The figure stepped forward, and the air seemed to grow colder still. James could feel the floor beneath him begin to shift, as though the room itself were changing shape. The walls seemed to close in on him, moving ever closer, their breath growing louder. His chest constricted as if there was something pressing against him from all sides. It was no longer just a room. It was something alive, an entity that fed on his fear, on his confusion. No, James gasped, his voice trembling. This can't be real. It can't be. But the shadows responded with a low, guttural laugh, the sound reverberating around him like a distant storm. Reality? The voice whispered. Reality is a lie. And now, it's yours to live. James wanted to scream, wanted to run, but the air was thick, too thick to escape. The shadows began to reach out, curling around his legs like tendrils of some ancient, twisted thing. His breath quickened, and his mind spiraled. The door was gone. The walls had closed in. The house had swallowed him whole. The shadows tightened around James, an unseen force that seemed to constrict him, drawing him deeper into the room's oppressive grasp. His breath quickened, the air impossibly thick, stifling. The room wasn't simply enclosing him, it was changing him. His heart hammered in his chest, and his fingers trembled as he reached out, desperately searching for something solid. Anything that could break the suffocating hold the room had on him. The walls around him were alive, their breathing, the subtle expansion and contraction, grew louder with each passing second. He could hear the scraping sounds once more, like nails dragging across stone. But this wasn't just an ordinary room. The walls didn't just breathe, they whispered. Soft, unintelligible murmurs filled the space, coming from every direction, surrounding him. The voice from the darkness, what had it said? I am nothing. I am a space that should not exist. The words echoed in his mind, repeated again and again, like an incantation. The room was aware of him. It was alive, in ways that defied logic, sanity, or reason. James staggered backward, his mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. His eyes darted around the room, but there was no escape. No way out. The walls were closing in on him. The whispers grew louder now, almost as if the walls were speaking directly to him. You should never have come, they murmured. You shouldn't be here. The words were so soft, so insistent, they almost felt like a memory, a distant warning he had forgotten to heed. But it was too late now. He was trapped. The darkness in the corner of the room flickered, and suddenly the figure stepped forward again, closer, yet still not fully seen. It was as though the shadows clung to it, hiding its form. Only the outline was visible, indistinct and shifting, like a black mist in the corner of his eye. For a moment, James couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, and his lungs felt like they were filled with lead. The figure was coming toward him now. Slowly. Methodically. There was nowhere to hide. The closer the figure came, the more the room seemed to pulse around James. His skin tingled, as though every inch of his body was being watched, evaluated by something unseen. The walls pressed in, and the floor beneath his feet felt as though it was softening, like it was no longer solid. And then, the figure, its shape now more distinct, spoke again. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear, sharp, and filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. You don't understand, do you? James's throat was dry. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him, trapped in the ever-tightening grip of fear. His eyes flicked from the shape in the corner to the walls that continued to shift and writhe, the shadows making grotesque patterns on the floor and ceiling. This place, this thing you found, the voice was filled with something like pity, but also something else, a deep, inescapable knowledge of what was about to unfold. It's always been here. It was waiting. For you. James's stomach twisted into a knot. His eyes darted toward the door. It was still sealed, but now he saw something new, a faint outline on the wall, as though the shape of the door had once been there. Something long hidden, something buried deep beneath the layers of time. He had uncovered it. But it wasn't meant to be uncovered. It had been waiting, silent, for someone to find it. "This is where you stay now," the voice continued, the words cold as ice. "You will never leave." The floor beneath him shifted again. James stumbled, his mind reeling as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow, darkening, creeping toward him like tendrils. His head felt foggy. His thoughts were slipping away, like sand through his fingers. Something in this room was eating at his mind, gnawing away at his sanity. He couldn't hold on to his thoughts anymore. What was happening to him? James didn't know how long he stood there, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to breathe. His mind was spinning, disconnected from reality. Time itself seemed to warp around him, twisting into something unrecognizable. Everything felt wrong. The room, the walls, the air, even the shadows. His memories felt distant, like they were someone else's. His name, his house, his life, were they even real? Had any of it ever been real? A strange thought began to form at the back of his mind. What if I've never left? What if I've always been here? What if you've always been here? The voice echoed in his head. The words were no longer coming from the figure in the corner. They were coming from everywhere, inside his skull, outside his body, in the walls, in the shadows. They were inside him. James looked around in a panic, his mind struggling to hold on to something tangible, but the room was changing again. The shadows writhed, taking shape, shifting into distorted figures that flickered in and out of existence. They were watching him, waiting for something. A door. Somewhere. The door that had disappeared when he entered. It had never really closed, had it? It wasn't sealed. It was just hidden. Hidden in plain sight. He could feel it now, just beneath the surface. The room wasn't just alive, it was a part of him. A part of everything. And that realization shattered whatever fragile grip he had left on his sanity. A sudden flash pierced the suffocating silence. It was a memory, a moment long buried in his mind, something he had forgotten in the years since the house had first come into his life. He was standing at the threshold of the house, the keys in his hand, the warm light of the sunset spilling across the porch. He had moved in so quickly, eager to start fresh, to leave behind the past. He hadn't looked at the house too closely then, not beyond its worn walls and creaky floors. But now, in the suffocating darkness of the room, everything clicked into place. Everything. The house had never been normal. The walls had always been wrong. The spaces had always felt off-kilter. The shadows had always whispered, though he hadn't heard them until now. James took a step back, stumbling. His heart pounded as the walls around him seemed to pulse faster, as though the room were feeding off his fear. It was feeding off him, feeding off the truth he had buried. This wasn't a house. It was a trap. A living entity that had claimed him the moment he stepped through its door. And now, it was tightening its grip, unwilling to let him go. The room that shouldn't exist was a prison. And James was its newest occupant. The air in the room grew heavy, dense, almost suffocating. James could feel every pulse of the walls around him, every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. His senses were assaulted by the growing presence of the house, an overwhelming force that seemed to pervade everything. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was alive. With each breath, James felt like the house was pulling him deeper into its dark embrace, sucking him in like a black hole, relentless and insatiable. His mind felt frayed at the edges, his thoughts spinning in dizzying circles, unable to grasp onto anything solid. But there was one thing he knew. He wasn't leaving. His eyes darted toward the shadows, desperate for a way out, but there was no escape. No window. No door. Not even a crack in the walls to squeeze through. The space was closing in, the edges of the room blurring and merging into a single, oppressive void. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him, and for a moment, the floor seemed to shift beneath him. He staggered, clutching the nearest wall to steady himself. His fingers brushed against something cold, something that sent a chill straight to his bones. His heart leapt into his throat. Beneath the peeling wallpaper, a dark outline had emerged, a door. It was barely visible, almost imperceptible, but it was there. James's breath caught in his chest as he reached toward it, his hand trembling. It was a door he had never seen before. A door that shouldn't have existed. It was the way out. Or so he hoped. James's hand hesitated just inches from the door, but before he could touch the handle, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You can't leave." The room shuddered, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. He froze, his mind racing. That voice, it was his voice. But it wasn't his. It was an echo, a reflection, a shadow of something that had once been. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe, forming shapes, figures, faces. Each one was familiar, but distorted, corrupted by the very essence of the room. They were fragments of memories. His memories. Faces he thought he had forgotten. His mother. His father. The smile of his younger brother. But the smiles had long since faded. They were replaced with empty eyes, hollow expressions that stared at him through the darkness. "You can't leave, James," the voice whispered again, this time softer, as if it were trying to reach him through a haze. "You belong here. We all do." The room seemed to close in tighter around him. The edges of the walls blurred until they were no longer solid. The floor felt like it was giving way beneath his feet, the wood bending and creaking as though it were alive. James backed away from the door, his chest tightening with an overwhelming sense of dread. The memories were coming to life, crawling out of the walls like roaches, all the painful moments of his past brought to the surface, forcing him to relive them. But something was wrong. He realized it then. Something in the memories, something in the faces, wasn't right. They were distorted. Twisted versions of the people he once knew. What had they become? The door before him beckoned, its handle glinting in the dim light. His heart pounded with hope and fear. He had to know what lay behind it. Could it really be the way out? With trembling hands, James grasped the handle. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, he felt a surge of energy, an electric charge that shot through his arm. It was as though the house itself was alive, aware of his every move. He turned the handle. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. The faintest hint of a smell, musty, earthy, lingered in the air, something decayed. The stairs seemed to go on forever, disappearing into the blackness below. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices. His name echoed from the shadows, each repetition a knife in his mind. James, come back. You can't escape. James's heart raced as he peered into the abyss. He wanted to flee, to turn and run, but his feet refused to move. Something in the house had him rooted in place, like a fly caught in amber, unable to escape. It wasn't just the house holding him, he realized now. It was the past. It was the guilt. The memories. They had all caught up with him, and they wouldn't let him go. A low, guttural noise echoed from the depths of the stairs, a growl or perhaps a scream. He couldn't tell which. But whatever it was close. Too close. The door behind him slammed shut. James spun around, his breath catching in his throat. The room had changed again, its edges sharp and jagged, like a broken mirror. The walls were alive, breathing in sync with his own panicked heartbeat. The shadows had formed into something else now, figures, their faces hidden in the darkness, but their presence felt. They were the people he had lost, the family, the friends, torn away from him by time, by fate, by his own actions. They were here, waiting for him to remember, waiting for him to face them. You can't escape, they murmured in unison. James fell to his knees, his mind shattering under the weight of the truth. The house wasn't just a building, it was a prison, an entity that fed on the memories and regrets of its inhabitants. It had fed on his guilt, on the things he had buried, the things he had never forgiven himself for. And now, it was consuming him. The last thing James saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was the door that led down. Down into the past, into the very heart of the house, into the secrets he had hidden away for so long. But he never took that step. The room had won. He would never leave.